Okay, members, we are now live streaming. Over to you, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and welcome everybody to the first virtual full council meeting. I think this is the biggest meeting we've done so far, so we will do our best to keep everything running smoothly for everyone. The very first item, I'm inviting Julie to do the roll call, please.
You're still muted, Julie.
Mm. No, you're still muted, Julie.
Apologies, Chairman.
That's all right.
Councillor Ashby. Councillor Askew.
Here.
Councillor Attewell.
Here.
Councillor Bambridge.
Here.
Councillor Burt.
Yes.
Councillor Borrett.
Present.
Councillor Bowes.
Present.
Councillor Brain.
Present.
Councillor Brindle.
Here.
Councillor Bushell.
Present.
Councillor Carter. Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
Present.
Councillor Sam Chapman-Allen.
Here.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Clausen.
Here.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Cowan.
Here.
Councillor Crane.
Present.
Councillor Dale.
Present.
Councillor Dowling.
Present.
Councillor Duffield.
Here.
Councillor Dygan. Councillor Eagle. Councillor Gilbert.
Here.
Councillor Gray.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Hewitt.
Here.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Jermy.
Here.
Councillor Cadell.
Here.
Councillor Kiddle Morris.
Here.
Councillor Kybird.
Here.
Councillor Ian Martin.
Here.
Councillor Keith Martin.
Here.
Councillor Monument.
Here.
Councillor Morton. Councillor Morton.
Sorry. Here.
Councillor Nairn.
Here.
Councillor Nunn. Councillor Oliver.
Present.
Councillor Robinson.
Present.
Councillor Sherwood.
Present.
Councillor Suggett.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Here.
Councillor Terry.
Here.
Councillor Turner.
Here.
Councillor Webb.
Here.
Councillor Wickerson.
Here.
Councillor Wilkin.
Here.
And Councillor Wilkinson.
Present.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Julie. Right, the first item is the election of chairman. So I'm going to step down figuratively and hand over to Councillor Roy Brain.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody here. So the first item on the agenda is to elect the chairman for the ensuing year. Do we have any nominations? Somebody?
Yep, Paul Hewitt.
I've got my hand up, Councillor Brain.
I can't see any of that, I'm afraid.
My
Sorry,
bad.
Paul.
Right. Yeah.
And
Do you want me to make a nomination now, Councillor Brain?
Yes, please.
Thank you. There are a few people who better reflect the ethos, community spirit and work ethic that makes this council look and feel what it is, especially now. It gives me great pleasure to nominate my friend and fellow councillor for Shipton Wiscarning, Linda Turner, for the position of Chairman of Council for the forthcoming year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hurt. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Peter Wilkinson will second that, Councillor Brain.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilkinson. Are there any more nominations? I take that silence is golden. In that case, we will move to the vote, which will be done by a show of hands, proper hands, not virtual hands. Everybody can, yes. That appears to be unanimous on my screens, Julie. I don't know how you're getting on.
Yes, Councillor Braham, it's unanimous.
Lovely job. Thank you very much. I would now like to hand over to...
No, sorry, that wasn't unanimous at all. I was waiting for those against.
Sorry. Those against?
That's me.
Lovely. Okay, so that has been noted, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Braham.
Right. I now declare that Councillor Linda Turner is now Chairman of Breckland Council for the ensuing year. And obviously I wish her all the best of luck, and I know she'll carry on from where she left off. She's been a really super chairman to work with this year. So there you go, Linda, it is back to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braham, and thank you everybody for your confidence in me moving forward. So now, and I will sign the declaration as and when is physically possible, obviously. We now move to item 2, the appointment of the Vice Chairman. Do I have any nominations for Vice Chairman of the Council?
I nominate Roy Braham.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have a seconder?
I will second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kybird. Are there any other nominations? Can't see any, Julie, can you?
Chairman, I can't see anyone else's hand raised.
Okay, with that one nomination, will you please raise your hands, your real hands, in favour of that nomination? Any against? I can't see any, Julie. So
No,
that is
no.
unanimously carried. Welcome, Roy. I will say a few words later on, but I'm delighted to have you as my Vice Chairman once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted, and I'd like to thank everybody for their faith. I would try and have the chain on where you could see it, but I need to have it under my double chin, so I'll just see the green, and thank everybody very much.
Thank you. Right, item 3 is apologies. Julie, please.
Chairman, I have apologies from Councillor Ashby and Councillor Digan. And sorry, I can see that Councillor Nunn has joined us, so I'm going to mark him as present.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other apologies from the floor for anyone?
Yes, Madam Chairman, Councillor Carter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, we move to item 5, the suspension of standing order number 5, and I'm going to hand over to Mark Stinson, our Executive Manager.
Chairman, apologies, I was just reading. Did you deal with the minutes at item 4?
I didn't. You're quite right. That's why we have these legal eagles to spot the errors. Thank you very much. Okay, moving backward to item 4, the minutes. I'm assuming everyone has read the minutes. If there are no questions, I will ask for a vote. Are there any questions on the minutes? Please raise your hand clearly if you do have.
Councillor Tim Burt.
Yep.
Thank
Councillor
you. There
Burt.
were a couple of things on the minutes from last time which were to be investigated, and I've not yet had responses on those. Just wondered what sort of timescale to be investigated actually covers. That was the two that were to be looked at was the exempt items not being sent to me, which is on page 4, and access to the intranet, which is on page 22. Thank you.
I'll hand that back to Max, possibly.
Chairman, if I can assist, apologies to Councillor Burt. He clearly hasn't had a response on those. I'd ask Julie to make a note and to follow up with me after the meeting, and I'll make sure that's done promptly. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, is that fine with you, Councillor Burt? Good. Any other questions on the accuracy of the minutes? We're now having to dodge 3 screens, so it's going to take a little while.
Chairman, there are no hands raised.
Nope, I agree with that. So will you please raise your hands in favour of accepting the minutes? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Nope. Okay with that, Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Right, now I'll go on to item 5 and hand over to Mark Stinson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, in order to keep the business today as manageable as possible, we have removed the non-essential business, which is essentially the reporting of committee minutes to council. It's not a legal requirement, but we are required to waive Standing Order 5 in order to do so, because Standing Order 5 sets out the order of business. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have to have a show of hands on that one, Mark, or not?
Yes, please, Chairman.
Right, okay. If you're in favour of the proposal under item 5, please raise your hands clearly. Any against?
Councillor Burt.
Thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, so that is carried. Thank you very much. We move on to item 6, declarations of interest. If any members have any interest they need to declare, where you have a disclosable pecuniary interest, please do so now. Should you have, and the topic comes up, you will be asked to leave the room temporarily. Thank you. So does anybody have any interest to declare? Please raise your hand for Julie to see clearly.
No hands raised. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on to item 7, Chairman's announcements. I'm just going to do a really short resume of the Chairman's year to date. I was at a Silver Social performance in Shipton Church when William Nunn, who was then the leader, rang me and asked if I would consider standing as chairman of the council for the year 2019 to 20. The officer with me said, "Are you okay?" as I suddenly sat down. I was, of course, delighted to be asked and happily took up the role in May 2019, looking forward to just 1 year's hard work, a lot of sausage rolls, and a good excuse to buy some new clothes. So since taking up the role and until the 9th of March this year, between the Vice Chairman and I, we've attended 103 civic events on behalf of the council, ranging from a cup of coffee at home with 2 Durham veterans in their home to the many civic services and receptions. I've enjoyed every single one, but inevitably there are some that I will never forget. feeding the giraffes at Banham Zoo, joining sporting legends at President's Day in Thetford with the Essex Disabled Sports Foundation, the enthronement of the new Bishop of Norwich in the cathedral, and the opening of the Nook, the new Norfolk Children's Hospice with the Duchess of Cambridge. And probably most memorable, my own civic service held at All Saints Church, Shipton. And that's just a snapshot of the past few months. Then we were hit with the pandemic and everyone's roles were changed. So since the 9th of March, after raising the flag for Commonwealth Day, whilst Roy and I haven't physically attended events, we've zoomed into a number, including the change of command at Lakenheath and the Armed Forces Day. And we've been kept up to date with civic news, appointments and information. We've supported photo shoots in our market towns for the Confidence campaign, and when able, visited local residents and local businesses at a safe distance. You will remember that my 2 nominated charities focused on those who work to break the chain of domestic abuse. Over £3,000 has been sent to my 2 charities, Daisy in Watton and Leeway Norwich. Not as much as I would have liked, of course, but we had to cease fundraising events with the onset of COVID-19. And now, thanks to your support for my continuing as chairman until next May, my 1 year turns into 2. How the rest of that year will pan out is anyone's guess, but I guess there's always a silver lining in every cloud. I don't have to buy any more new clothes or hats. That was my deal with our leader, and I won't have to eat too many sausage rolls. I'd like to thank Roy Brain, my vice chairman, and his wife Karen, whose support has been invaluable throughout. Also, many thanks to Catherine Boddy and the Democratic Services team for supporting both of us so ably during some happy and not so happy times. I've decided not to nominate a charity as such, but to put any money raised during the year towards a community event so that individuals and community groups can be thanked for their contributions and resilience during the pandemic. Thank you for your confidence in electing me as chairman for this year. I'll promise I'll try to do my best for Breckland in whatever shape or form, because who knows what's round the corner. Thank you. I've just got 3 very short announcements. Could all members make sure that they look at the e-learning cybersecurity modules that you've all been sent the link to? We know from personal experience that there is a lot of hacking in and disquiet amongst social media, etc. So if you look at these modules, it should keep you a bit safer. And also, could you refresh your knowledge of the Teams system, because that may be coming into use as well. And thirdly, some of you have heard of the Milk Shed for Carers that we run in Breckland for officers and members. A lot hadn't heard about it, so every member has been sent the details. And if you would like more information or to come along, contact Karen Hitchcock, who is the officer organising it. Those of us that go find it really, really useful. 1 or 2 members in the room go, and it's a good support network for those of us that are caring for other people, whether they're older people, children, or anybody. So that's the end of my announcements. And now we move to item 8, leaders' announcements, and I invite the leader to speak.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And can I be one of the first to congratulate you and Councillor Brame on your nominations and successful appointments as Chairman and Vice Chairman for the ensuing year. And I know that both of you will be fantastic ambassadors to Breckland in what will be some immensely challenging times as we move ahead. Councillors, good morning. I'm delighted that we're able to get together today for annual general meeting to reflect on what has been quite a year for Breckland District Council. Clearly, the last few months have brought major challenges for all of us and all of our residents and businesses, and we as a council were required quickly to pivot, to change our focus and priorities in order to best serve the immediate needs of everybody within Breckland. I'll reflect more on this pandemic shortly, but before I go on, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your support in responding during the pandemic and your role you've played in keeping residents informed and protected as much as possible. Whether you've passed on messages about the help being made available, offered frontline support to those individuals in your communities who needed it, supported those individuals who were shielding, got involved with delivering food parcels, making welfare calls, and so much more, the way you have responded and the whole council has responded has been nothing short of fantastic. And of course, alongside all of the support which you have offered, the hundreds and thousands of volunteers throughout the district has been incredible. And without their contribution, Breckland would not have been able to, as a community, supported so many. However, I don't want to overlook the excellent progress that has been made by the council prior to the pandemic. As you know, as a council, we want to make sure that Breckland is a place in which we can live, work, visit and invest. The delivery of quality, cost-effective services such as regular bin collections, housing support, tackling antisocial behaviour is at the heart of what we do. But we must recognise that we play a key role in the health and well-being of all of our residents, delivering sustainable growth and driving a positive change amongst our communities. Core services such as community safety, economic development, planning, housing, leisure, well-being and environmental services are increasingly recognised as vital components of local health systems. We've been making big inroads in helping vulnerable residents throughout the district, from harm of exploitation, for particular focus on tackling county lines for those drug exploitations, domestic abuse and violence, social isolation and mental health. But we have so much more we need to do. This included the extending of the popular Silver Social Arts programme for a further 3 years, working with expert organisations such as the DAISY programme, which support people experiencing domestic abuse. And I'm so pleased that the chairman, through her charity over the last year, was able to raise awareness. And of course, we were reviewing opportunities to provide wider mental health first aid support to members in our community to ensure we're supporting everybody, regardless of your background, your circumstances, and where you come from. We've also taken steps forward with the managed growth for our district, both in terms of our housing and jobs. We have adopted a local plan back in December 2019, and we'll be using this as the blueprint for future growth until 2036, though this is subject to a full review. Another area of focus is our climate change. And as we know, the environment is such an important part for us within the Brecks and Breckland. As a council, we have committed to developing a long-term sustainable policy and programme of activity to address these issues. This will focus on the ways we can be more environmentally friendly as an organisation and business, ways we can influence our communities, residents and businesses through statutory powers, and ways to empower our communities to make greener lifestyle choices. While the pandemic, Chairman, has unfortunately slowed some of this work, it hasn't stopped us from making some progress in the last few months. And as members will be aware, the council has confirmed to switch into a green energy tariff for its buildings from October of this year. We've promoted the work with our housing developers to find opportunities to include bird and bee bricks and other environmentally friendly initiatives as part of our planning functions. And of course, we've launched initiatives such as Let the Green Verges in the district grow longer to create wildlife havens for all our bees and hoverflies. As I mentioned, Chairman, in respect to the pandemic has dominated our lives in recent weeks and months, and it seems likely that this will continue to deal with the coronavirus in some shape or form for the foreseeable future. From a standing start, this council moved the vast majority of its staff from working in the office to working from home, creating support hubs for our residents, support hubs for our businesses, and set up grants processes to distribute funding to businesses in all needs, shapes and forms. There are more than 3,600 people in Breckland classed as extremely vulnerable by the National Health Service, with many unable to shop for their own food or collect vital medication. Our hubs, volunteers and community support, using many redeployed officers with fantastic support across the district, sent out more than 15,000 meals, delivery of medication and made welfare calls to all of those residents when they needed it most. This is a vital piece of work to keep people safe. And we've learned so much during the pandemic, Chairman, we must not lose that success. The lockdown period has clearly hit many businesses hard, which is why we're setting up the Shop with Confidence campaign to let people get back onto those high streets so those businesses can thrive. Our support for businesses has seen the distribution of £27 million of the national and local grant funding support businesses through this very difficult period. And I know that some members on this meeting today, Chairman, businesses have directly benefited from that. It was a phenomenal response to contact hundreds of local eligible businesses and ensure they got the support they needed and were entitled to. But it didn't stop there, Chairman, and it hasn't stopped there. And we continue to offer that business support for all of the businesses across the district for the foreseeable future. COVID has also brought a significant financial pressure to us as a council, compounded by that loss of income in some areas, which has been highlighted back at the Cabinet meeting in July of this year. Initially, we were looking at the cost pressures of about 3.7 million in this current year, but through government grants, the use of one-off reserve funding, and reviewing some of our projects, programmes and activities, and some hard work undertaken by both Cabinet members and officers, we think this gap will be mitigated to around 220k currently. A revised budget, Chairman, will be forthcoming to Council in September of this year for review and approval. Earlier on, Chairman, I thanked all of you for your support during the pandemic, and I hope you will join me in also commending our officers for their speed, efficiency, effectiveness with which they responded to the internal issues. They too, Chairman, have had families, friends and relatives they've had to worry about. And many of our council officers, Chairman, have still been on that front line, possibly risking their own life in the wake of the pandemic. While our office, Chairman, does remain closed for the majority of staff for the time being, work is well underway to plan the recovery and consider how the future looks for Breckland Council operating. And we're looking to retain some of the positives over the last few weeks and months, such as our proven ability to work agilely in different ways. Looking ahead, we will continue to deliver against our vision, ensuring that Breckland District remains a place where businesses and residents can thrive. We will continue to deliver our core services, but also seek new opportunities to enhance the district and help people fulfil their full potential. We will continue to support our residents, particularly those most vulnerable, through initiatives such as Trip Start Transport Scheme for unemployed or economically inactive individuals, our Silver Social Arts Programme, early help hubs, and so much more. We will continue to support our economy to thrive, working both strategically through our partnerships with Norfolk County Council, New Anglia, local growth programmes, and members such as the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor, all the way through to on-the-ground support for local businesses such as our Confidence campaign. And of course, Chairman, there is so much more in relation to an emerging white paper for the possible part of devolution and local government reform, something which we must wait and respond to when the time is required. As a council, we have an excellent track record, Chairman, of delivering for the people we serve, and I'm confident that we will keep this up for the forthcoming years to come. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Leader. If you would like to ask the Leader a question based on what he's just been talking through, please raise your hand clearly so that we can see and make a note of who wishes to speak.
Councillor Mike Brindle.
Right, okay. Would you like to kick off then, Councillor Brindle?
If I can, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Just to try and quote one of the things that our leader said, I think he said regular bin services, and that was amongst a list of things, is at the heart of what we do. Can I, not for the first time I fear, express a concern about the need for Serco to be more imaginative, it seems to me obvious, in their in the way they carry out the contract. We have a major problem in Thetford with the emptying of bins along the river, which is a very popular part of the town during the summer months and has been particularly popular in the last couple of months as the lockdown has receded somewhat. So people have been picnicking, camping almost, certainly swimming around and near the river for 6 or 8 weeks. As a result, the bins along that route, predictably, are always full before the next collection is due, and litter is put beside the bin or sometimes some distance from the bin. My question, therefore, is, can we please persuade Serco to empty the bins when they need emptying, not just on some pre-allocated time? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brindle.
Sorry,
Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. If you're happy that I respond, as it was a question to the leader on my statement. Councillor Brindle, you're absolutely right. And I will study this and look into this. However, I hope that he would appreciate that during the pandemic, our priority was to support household collections during the pandemic. We had at times seen a reduction in Serco staff on the front line due to isolating and other reasons. And as such, our priority was domestic household collections. There has been a large increase in the volume during COVID on our walkway waste bins. And I would implore every resident of Breckland to be responsible within the district, not just in relation to fly tipping, but also your own waste. You left your house with that waste. If sadly the bin is full, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Brindle, that isn't acceptable, I would encourage residents to take that rubbish back home with them again, rather than leaving it on the side of the bin in which it could blow away. We all have a responsibility for the district. It's the taxpayers of Breckland which fund our services. And if you lay the rubbish next door to the bin because it is full, and I apologise for it being full, it will then blow around the community and cause a greater hindrance and distraction on what is a beautiful community in Thetford. But I will look at reviewing our commitment of frequency of collections on our waste bins throughout the district, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Leader. Any other questions?
Councillor Robinson.
Yep, and Councillor Burt. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the point made by Councillor Brindle. He's probably aware, as all Thetford town reps are, that the town council are currently undergoing a project to map all bins locations within the town. I know within my ward, we recently had an area opened up as Blakeney Meadows with the addition of bins, which weren't necessarily on the radar. Well, they definitely weren't there 6 months ago. So I think, yeah, it'd be good if once the town council's done that, they share that with Serco to move this project forward.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. The leader of the council attended the Attleborough Town Council meeting on the 13th of July and spoke about a post-COVID recovery and said that from a Breckland perspective, we are changing our priorities, changing what our focus is, and that was for both residents and businesses. And I wondered whether the leader might be able to expand on what these changes might be, and when we might get a chance to discuss and scrutinise them. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
Thank you, Chairman. For a point of process, that question should be taken under question without notice, but I'm happy to take it under my leader's statement. So thank you ever so much for tuning in, Councillor Burt, to the meeting of Attleborough Town Council. It was a well-attended meeting. I'm sorry that I couldn't speak for longer than 10 minutes. And hopefully that what I said was clear and succinct. The world post-COVID has changed, and throughout the pandemic we have supported many vulnerable residents and businesses across the district, and in doing so we have a phenomenal amount of data and information and good working practices now with voluntary sectors and businesses across the district. So my comments at Attleborough Town Council as part of the recovery is how we pivot now as an organisation to make sure we continue now to support those vulnerable residents and businesses going forward. For example, Chairman, over the coming weeks and months, you'll see, hopefully in the recovery document, that we will be extending our community hub system as a permanent part of Breckland's BAU, business as usual. It wasn't established before, but it's been so successful that we must continue to deliver that as a type of service, working collectively with town and parish councils, voluntary groups, Norfolk County Council, and so many other partners to ensure that vulnerable residents across the district are supported moving forward. And likewise, Chairman, in our business, economy and investment support, we now have a good working relationship across the district. We now understand what the needs of our residents and businesses are to a greater extent than we did before. So in doing so, Chairman, we will have to extend and improve our business and investment support team in a similar vein and a possible similar system, Chairman, to the community hub and the voluntary piece, where we have a hub and spoke system with clusters supporting those individuals. So there's some of the schemes, Chairman, which are coming forward. The Cabinet are working diligently with senior officers at the council to pull forward some of these ideas, suggestions, And as the emerging recovery budget comes forward in September, Chairman, I'm hopeful that the corporate plan as a document will be refreshed to some degree, which will show a different priorities for the council moving forward in a post-COVID world.
Thank you, Leader. I can't see any other hands.
Councillor Terry Jermy and then Councillor Roger Attewell.
Right, thank you very much. In that order then, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chairman. Congratulations on your reappointment, and may I, on behalf of the Labour Group, take the opportunity to thank you for the welfare calls that you made to members, including our group, which were very well received during the lockdown. Very grateful, thank you. Sam, I wanted to ask about furloughing, because I know you raised a question at the New Anglia LEP board meeting. I was reading their minutes recently, and you rightly challenged the LEP to make available figures on business type for the numbers of people furloughed in each district. I wondered if you could take an opportunity to highlight what support there might be from the council for any businesses thinking about making redundant staff across Breckland once the furlough scheme changes and ends as the months progressed. I would like businesses to feel supported by the council. So is there an opportunity here for you to confirm what is available, please?
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Councillor Jeremy. I'm sure you found the minutes of the New Anglia LEP board meeting a riveting read, and I'm pleased that you noted that I was critical and challenging of some of the proposals which were forthcoming. Sadly, Chairman, across the piece, HMRC haven't been overly generous with the data to a granular detail of what businesses across the county, but particularly for us in Breckland, have in relation to the furlough scheme. New Anglia LEP, Norfolk County Council Economics team and our own Breckland economic team are aware of some businesses throughout the district who have raised awareness of some concerns that they may not be able to sustain their current workforce on the furlough scheme past the 1st of August or on the extended furlough scheme beyond October of this year. As part of that, Chairman, and in response to Councillor Jeremy's questions, Breckland Council as an officer group is working hard and diligently with New Anglia LEP and the DWP and the New Anglia LEP Skills Board to try and plug those activities and programmes in which we're aligning current vacancies within Breckland and Norfolk so that those individuals can quickly reapply for those jobs, working out what the skills gaps are for any of those individuals within certain sectors, so that the DWP are pivoting overnight to try and upskill those individuals into certain areas. More importantly, the DWP, through the lobbying of ourselves and other councils across Norfolk, have extended their workforce incredibly to be able to respond at pace and at need to the possible impending increase in furlough numbers. I think, Councillor Jeremy, in response to your question in the realm, it's actually frustrating that once again central government haven't shared that data with us to a granular level, because if they could, we would be able to target directly in a proactive manner some of those concerns and issues we have. But at this moment in time, we're responding to the goodwill and those relationships we have formed with those businesses to early on communicate with us of any concerns they have in relation to possible redundancies across the district. As I said earlier in response to Councillor Burt's question, part of our response and our recovery post-COVID, Chairman, will be that we have an increased economic business support team within Breckland, and part of their role when they're established will be to support businesses throughout their longevity, however long or short that may be. Sadly, Chairman, it may fall a little bit short of the initial furlough of the 1st of August, but we're working at pace to try and establish that team to make sure that we can respond in a timely manner throughout.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Attewell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from the question that Councillor Brindle asked, we seem to have a serious problem in the district. I call it a complete lack of respect by some people for the open countryside. The amount of rubbish, litter that is left in some of our most beautiful areas. We've got two such areas here in Swanton Morley where I live, and it is horrendous. We've had volunteers that are going out on a regular basis to have to clear up this rubbish, bag it up to try and protect the environment and wildlife. I just wondered if Breckland Council, with our partners in the town and parish councils, could do a piece of work in seriously promoting the fact that we need to have more respect for the countryside. I know when I was a boy, we had the Keep Britain Tidy campaign, and that seems to have sort of fallen by the wayside, sadly. But I really hope that's something that Breckland could take up, promote through its communications team and through all members, to really emphasise the fact that it's really not that difficult. If you're going out for a picnic or a day out, you can bag your rubbish up and take it home with you and put in your wheelie bin provided by Breckland Council. So I'd be grateful if you could do that. And also, would you join me, Leader, in just saying a special thank you to our Democratic Services team? All the staff have done a fantastic job throughout, but I recognise that that's been a Herculean effort to get all these virtual meetings up and running. I know in particular, because I've sat in on many of the meetings, that Julie and Teresa, they are a little bit under stress at the beginning of the meeting to see if we go virtually and how can everybody be seen and heard, etc. So I really would just like to place on record my thanks on behalf of the independent group. And I would hope that everybody else would join me in that, to Democratic Services. I think they've done a superb job to make sure that we can carry on the work of the council and communicate with our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And I think we all echo your last sentiments. That would be absolutely right to have it in the minutes. Thank you very much. Sam, do you want to pick up Councillor Attwell's other part?
Thank you, Chairman. And absolutely, I completely endorse Councillor Attwell's comments. For the few Zoom meetings or Teams meetings I do on my own, the panic which ensues on me just before it starts, when I've only got 1 or 2 people on the line, is incredible. So when you've got a whole council and hundreds of residents hopefully watching on YouTube or Facebook, I'm sure the pressure is even greater. But thank you to all the Democratic Services team who haven't just supported the democratic position of the council, but of course have been helping many vulnerable residents and businesses throughout the pandemic. In response to your question, Councillor Attwell, I completely agree with your comments. We all have access to our own domestic bins, and I said in response to Councillor Brindle's comment earlier, you arrive with your waste, please have the responsibility and the decency to take it home with you. As you know, we have a really strong enforcement performance across Breckland. We are the envy of colleagues across the county, and we weren't always in that position, but we've worked tremendously hard, and our officer has done an incredible job to undertake that work. We still have more work to undertake. We have, as you know, Chairman, ring-fenced some of the income from fines. Predominantly that's being supported through an education scheme with schools in certain target areas across the district. But I'm more than happy, Chairman, to ask the Cabinet member and officers to study with interested parties across the district councils, parish councils, how we can have a better campaign across the district. I was made aware of a successful campaign, I think it was in Yorkshire, who had a play on the word of a word beginning with T and ended in R, which seemed to gain the hearts of many within that community of don't be a. So maybe there's something similar we can implement in Breckland, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and for your discretion in describing that last item. Julie, I can't see any more hands. Nope.
Yeah, Chairman, I agree. There's no more hands raised.
Thank you very much. Right, we will move on to item 9, which is questions on notice under Standing Order number 6. There are 12 questions, and we've agreed to, for the most effective way to do it, is I will read out the name of the author of the question and to whom it is being addressed. Julie will kindly actually read the question. The Cabinet member or committee chairman will answer. There can be one supplemental question from the original author to that person. So this is not a debate or a discussion group. This is more of an information giving session. So with no more ado, Councillor Burt. Councillor Burt, do you wish to speak?
Thank you very much. I was advised by, in a meeting with the Chief Executive Officer on the 7th of November, In fact, I was encouraged to submit written questions as a better way to get answers. So I'm pleased that there's so many questions being submitted. But I was told that we would get a reply before the meeting so that it was possible for us to consider what we're told in order to formulate a follow-up question. And I just wonder what procedurally, that obviously hasn't happened this time, but what is the right way to go about it?
I will ask Mr. Stinson if he would mind just talking you through that standing order, that part of the Constitution.
Thank you, Chairman. Procedurally, there are two options. The question can be responded to at the meeting or within 5 working days after the end of the meeting. But of course, where there is sufficient time, we have previously circulated responses prior to the meeting, if we're able to do so. There were a large number of questions on this occasion, and with us all working remotely, of course, it was difficult to coordinate all of those. But from a strictly procedural perspective, there is no requirement to circulate them before the meeting, but of course, where we can, it's always helpful.
Thank you. So the first question is from Councillor Helen Crane to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Paul Clausen. Julie, would you like to read the question, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The residents of Breckland need to have confidence in this council that Section 106 obligations are monitored and invoices sent to developers on time and chased accordingly if payment not received. The delay in this meant that Sam Tony did not receive a substantial sum of money when the developer submitted a planning obligation application some years after the development was completed and had never received an invoice from this council. It only coming to light when I became district councillor for Sam Tony and spotted a large sum of money on the available list, which turned out to actually not be available, having never been invoiced at the trigger point. Can we confirm to the council that there is now a robust system in place to ensure that this will not happen in the future?
Thank you, Councillor Clausen.
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry that you've had issues around payment of monies to Sam Tony. The 106 process in the council has been undergoing change in the last 12 months and updating all its records. There's improved coordination between the planning department and finance to ensure that all received monies are properly recorded and kept up to date. Invoices have been issued on old applications where monies have not been received following an extensive audit exercise. Inevitably, some developers, once they have been reminded of their obligations, choose to seek to modify the obligation. Any such application has to be assessed against the local plan and national planning guidance. From the end of this year, we will try to provide an infrastructure funding statement, which will detail how monies received from Section 106 payments have been spent. The work is underway to ensure this is done in line with the requirement. This, together with the produced over the last 12 months, will ensure that the monitoring of Section 106 agreement is robust and the problems you have experienced are not repeated.
Thank you, Councillor Crane. Are you satisfied with that response?
Yes, I am satisfied with that response, and obviously I hope that going forward that no other parish council will lose the amount of money that Sam Tony unfortunately did. I have had an apology from Mr. Rob Walker, which I have passed on to Sam Tony, but of course that is little help to them at this time. One thing I would perhaps ask and just add a question is, what advice would you give to parish councils? Because apparently Breckland does not have a legal obligation to look at the or monitor the Section 106 monies. It doesn't have a legal obligation, although I would say probably morally it does. What advice would you perhaps give to parish councils about keeping an eye on their Section 106 money? Would you say that's really for them to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clausen, are you coming back to Councillor Crane?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Crane. I think you've done a good piece of work here, and I would suggest you carry on in the same vein. And if you were listening to almost at the end, where it was saying that an infrastructure funding statement is going to be coming forward, so that should be automatic. But if you would like me to get something out to the parish councils, then of course I will, yeah, I'm prepared to do that for you. So if you'd let me know offline, and I will follow it up for you.
I think that would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can see Councillor Attwell's hand up, but this is not a discussion. The only supplemental question can come from the author, which it has. So thank you very much. I'm now moving on to question 2. And this is from Councillor Keith Gilbert to the Chairman of the Planning Committee, Councillor Nigel Wilkin. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Can the executive member for planning or the chairman of planning committee please explain why the members of the planning committee chairman's panel found it appropriate for planning application 3PL 2019 1554D land at Thetford Road, Watton for 180 dwellings, one of the largest and most controversial and sensitive applications seen in Watton, to be determined under officer delegation rather than for it to be considered by the planning committee, thereby denying members of the public who had many concerns about the application the right to address the planning committee and raise their concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkin.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert, for that question. The scheme of delegation requires only the following types of planning applications to be considered at Chairman's panel, which are applications which are called in subject to the criteria set out in the Constitution, or where a development is subject to policy, or applications where it is known that the applicant or agent is a councillor or member of staff. Officers can also decide to take further applications to panel to obtain a view on whether they should be held at planning committee if it is considered they raise sensitive or potentially contentious issues. Members of the panel are asked to consider the sensitivity of an application and make a recommendation to officers as to whether these should be heard at planning committee or not. In this instance, the application and its sensitivity was discussed, and the members of the panel came to a view that the application was not so significant to warrant a hearing at planning committee. Of specific note was the application was a reserved matters application where the principle of development had already been established by the granting of the outline planning consent. Members noted that any outstanding issues could be dealt with and resolved by planning officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert, do you have a supplemental question? Councillor Gilbert?
I'm trying to, right. It kept, every time I click the button to unmute, it disappeared. Right, thank you.
Please just keep control of your buttons and ask your supplemental question.
Yeah, thank you. Considering that this large and highly controversial application was delegated for an officer's decision by the chairman's panel of 3 members, causing a lot of anger in Watton and a lack of transparency in the matter, do you think that now is the time to look again at the role and remit of the chairman's panel and also the scheme of delegation for planning applications? Thank you.
Well, this particular one, as you will recall, Keith, many of the queries that were raised were brought to us at the panel, and the direction, I mean, most of them had actually been taken care of. And one of the most significant ones were the existing properties on, and I can't remember the name of the close there, but it's been there for about 40. Sorry?
Cannon Close.
Cannon Close, that's right. They had concern. That was the major concern, was the overlooking issues and the distances, which were addressed in this reserved matters application. And I mean, it did get quite a good debate. And as you well know, I mean, I spent my formative years living in Watton, so I know the area quite well. And most of the other things have been covered. So there's no mileage in it coming back to, in the view of the panel, to be debated even further. Thank you.
No.
And no, sorry, Keith.
He hasn't answered the question. The question was, do you think that it's now time to look again at the role and remit of the chairman's panel, and also the scheme of delegation for planning applications, not just this specific item, but in general?
Okay.
Councillor Gilbert,
Well,
I'm quite happy for
I will
Councillor
answer that, Madam Chair.
to ask.
Madam Chairman,
yeah, sure.
Could I just reply? Sorry, Madam Chairman, could I just reply? Yes, there is a review coming up in place anyway, Councillor Gilbert, so that will be taken care of. But I was just answering you directly because you said you'd had a lot of aggravation from residents. Thank you.
Good. Can I just remind members, if they are speaking, that the supplemental question should be relevant to the original question, not a separate topic. There is room under questions without notice if you have anything burning to bring it in at that point. Thank you. The third question is from Councillor Tim Burt to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen. Councillor Burt. Sorry, Julie, to read the question.
Thank you, Chair. The members of Local Plan Working Group were selected without disclosure of a brief or invitation to the opposition groups for discussion. At the Cabinet meeting of 1st of June 2020, Councillor Clausen said members were asked to volunteer to work on the LPWG, the Local Plan Working Group, and he would ask them to disclose their credentials. So, A, to whom was the request to volunteer to serve on the LPWG submitted? B, how was the selection of the LPWG members made? And C, what are the skills, attributes and expertise do the selected members bring to the LPWG?
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chairman. As a preamble to what I'm going to say, I really have to say that the way in which the opposition have politicised the Local Plan Working Group takes me right back to the days of 1999, when there was a complete them and us. So it looks like that's where we're going to go to. And then, as now, the opposition will come and claim to be helpful and supportive as always. And then they will do everything in their power to undermine us. So here we are, as I say, back to the future. But back to your specific question, Councillor Burt. I'll thank you for it. Now, there's no legal, I'm very sorry, but I really ought to get new glasses. No legal or constitutional rules in respect of the allocation of seats to the working group. Membership of the Local Plan Working Group was approved by full council at its meeting on the 28th of November 2019. Just to repeat that for you, 28th of November 2019. And there does not appear to have been any questions to council following that, and there have been no challenges of membership put forward to full council. The request for volunteers for the group was canvassed amongst members of the ruling group, and selection was based upon their attributes and members of the group could bring to the working group. And I'm aware that the members have indicated in previous meetings of working group what their attributes are. So I'm completely satisfied that they bring experience to the working group and that, yes, and without challenge. I'm really sorry here, I'm really struggling. Could you get me my magnifying glass? I'm really struggling to read this, no light. So sorry about that. I can't read the last little bit of it, but I will, we will be producing the working plan Sorry, I really can't read it.
Chairman,
Not
I'm happy to support Councillor Clausen because he shared with me his notes prior to that question. So the closing paragraph, the request to volunteers for this group was canvassed amongst members of the ruling group. The selection was based upon their attributes the members of the group could bring to the working group, and I'm aware that their members have indicated at previous meetings of the working group what these attributes are. I'm satisfied they bring experience of working on such groups previously, a willingness to challenge, and a desire to produce a local plan that will serve the residents of Breckland for years to come. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader, for helping Councillor Clausen out.
No, that's what I would have said, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Burt, do you have a supplemental question?
I think any politicisation is coming from one direction only. But being as I haven't had the full answer, perhaps I could have that in writing and I'll put in a written supplementary later.
Thank you very much. Just to inform people that the questions and responses will be sent out by email because some of the further questions contain tables, etc., which are quite hard to describe via Zoom. So you will get that information shortly. Thank you very much. Question 4 is from Councillor Terry Jeremy to the Leader as Chairman of the Cabinet. Julie, could you read the question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Could the Leader, as Chairman of Cabinet, confirm what alternative governance structures were considered in relation to the local plan working group prior to determining that a working group consisting of solely members of the ruling group would achieve the best outcome for Breckland residents?
Over to you, Leader.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Jeremy, for your question. As there is no legal or constitutional rule in respect to the allocations of seats to a working group, nor is it a decision-making body, it is the decision of Breckland's Cabinet with what they felt will be the best outcome for residents, and as such, the Cabinet made the decision that this would be a working group to Cabinet made up of the majority ruling group of Breckland Council.
Councillor Jeremy, do you have a supplemental question?
Thank you, Chairman. Given that both the Leader and I were still at school in 1999, I shan't comment on the previous response, but I do know that the local plan is a very sensitive topic Breckland-wide, and I would want for our residents to have faith in the process. With that in mind, will the Leader commit to reviewing what other governance structures are available nationally so that we can make sure our residents are getting the best possible result?
Thank you, Chairman. And to respond to Councillor Jeremy's question, democracy is key, and the democratic mandate for Breckland residents was a Conservative ruling group, and as such it is a Cabinet of a Conservative Cabinet who is established, and it is a Cabinet decision in relation to the local plan working group and policies. And of course, I hope that we support all residents and businesses across the district to ensure that Breckland is a place where residents and businesses can thrive. And I'm more than happy at the right juncture in time and through the process of the local plan working group to work with any members of this council, and more importantly, with community groups and businesses across the district to ensure we have a suitable local plan which will serve us for.
Thank you, Leader. Question 5 is from Councillor Stuart Terry to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chair. Could the Cabinet Member for Planning confirm whether the local plan working group will be completing a review of the effectiveness of the previous local plan consultation and engagement strategy?
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chairman. So thank you for your question. The Council will agree a new statement of community involvement that will govern the nature of community engagement in the preparation of the local review. It is important to note that whilst the Council wishes to engage all statutory and non-statutory stakeholders in the preparation of the plan, there are aspects of the plan that will be fixed. For example, the housing requirement and need for the plan to conform with legislation and national planning policy, and that there are competing views expressed in aspects of the plan where a judgment will need to be made.
Thank you. Councillor Terry, do you wish to come back with a supplemental question?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Question 6 is from Councillor Chris Harvey to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen. Julie, could you read the question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Could the Cabinet Member for Planning confirm what additional resources the Council would need to allocate to complete the full refresh of the local plan and what the cost of these additional resources will be?
Councillor Clausen.
Yes, thank you for the question. The cost of the local plan has yet to be established and will be dependent on the agreed context of the local plan going forward. Indeed, request was made at the last local plan for this to come forward, and that will be going to the next working group. So completing this, the work is being done to understand what will be required and what the cost implications over the next 4 years will be. It should be noted that the majority of the work required would be the same for a partial review of the local plan, and that it will be more cost effective to do a full review than to do a partial review, and have to start almost immediately on reviewing those areas of the plan that did not form part of the partial review.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, do you wish to come back with a supplemental question?
Not at the moment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Question 7 is from Councillor Mike Brindle to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen. It's your show, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Could the Cabinet Member for Planning confirm if there are any risks associated with undertaking a full review rather than a partial review, and will those risks apply equally to the whole district?
So thank you for your question. There are risks associated with any review of a local plan. However, it considered that these are significantly reduced with a full review is carried out. A longer time period provides greater opportunity for risk to be managed and mitigated. This is particularly important where the risk is out of the Council's control. The main risks are as follows. Understanding the housing requirement. It's not yet known what the housing requirement for Breckland will be or when it will be published. Agreeing a viable and deliverable development strategy that takes a 5-year housing land supply into account. Changes to national planning policy, planning white paper, and it's uncertain when and how these will come into force at this juncture. Any further consideration around the implication of the recent COVID-19 outbreak, a duty to cooperate, securing statements of common ground with key external stakeholders in developing the plan. A 5-year housing land supply. If the Council does not submit the review in accordance with policy INFO 3 or is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, then paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework will apply. That refers to the tilted balance, which is applied when the policies are most important for determining the application are out of date. It does not follow automatically that just because one of the policies for determining an application is out of date, the tilted balance must be applied and permission granted. Financial, staff resources, and the project management are further risks. These risks will also apply to a partial review, but will have significantly greater impact in terms of the programme and the robustness of the final document.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brindle, do you wish to come back with a supplemental question?
Thank you, Chairman. I do. The purpose of the question was to try and nudge us towards having a full review rather than a partial review, because I really find it hard to see the logic of a partial review. You review transport, but not green issues, and yet the two are wholly interlinked. So I'm just really hoping to receive from Councillor Clausen the answer, yes, we are travelling in the direction of a full review. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Well, the simple answer is yes. It was approved by Cabinet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Councillor Roger Attawell to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen. Julie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can the Cabinet Member for Planning please confirm the advantages and disadvantages of the Council undertaking a full review of its local plan compared to a partial review?
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your question. The main advantages are very much as I've just explained to Councillor Brindle, but I will go over them again. So council decisions will likely be better informed based on an appropriate evidence base and more effective duty to cooperate. Public consultation could be more extensive than that required to meet the minimum required to meet statutory requirements. A longer timetable allows time for greater and more effective community engagement, including on different options for development and policy development, if this is determined to be appropriate. There is more robustness in undertaking a full review as critical risks, including, for example, changes to national planning policy, are more likely to be able to be successfully managed, given the extended time period for production. And it enables the council to consider additional strands of new policy development over and above those required by the inspector, including aspects of design, and of course we intend to look at climate change. The council is required to undertake a full review of the plan within 5 years. By undertaking this task now, it enables full consideration to be given to all aspects of the plan review in a single document, thereby removing any concerns that the planning inspectorate may have regarding the partial review. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Attawell, do you wish to come back with a supplemental question?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you for that answer, Councillor Clausen. I would just say that on the disadvantages, which I don't think has been conveyed properly to all councillors, and this was backed up in a response to an email I sent to the Director of Planning, that because we're doing a full review, when we get to November 2022, which is just over a couple of years away, we're going to find that about 10 of our policies could be out of date and carry less weight in terms of the decision-making process when we're looking at planning applications. I think that council needs to be aware of this, because that will affect every community. I mean, he's got listed here Gen 05, settlement boundaries, HO1, development requirements, HO2, level and location of growth, HO3, development outside of boundaries of local service centres, HO4, villages and boundaries, HO5, small villages and hamlets outside of small settlement boundaries, provision, HO8, provision for travellers and travelling show people, ECO1, economic development, ECO3, general employment areas, ECO4, employment development outside general employment areas. So there is a real concern, and I think our communities, who we collectively all represent, will be really concerned that they thought they had a local plan that was locked, and that within the space of, this will be within 3 years of this the existing local plan being adopted, they suddenly find themselves vulnerable to aggressive development applications again. And I really think that that should have been made much clearer to councillors before this matter was brought to our attention at a previous meeting. And could I just also say, by way of a follow-up to this as well, as an opposition, and I know I speak for all my opposition colleagues here, we all want this to work. We all want this to be the best local plan for our district, for our communities, and we really do want to work together with everybody on this basis. But the clue is in the name opposition. We're not here to slavishly agree with everything that you put forward. The idea of opposition is that we scrutinise, we consider what you put forward, and we put forward suggestions, and we ask and we probe in the hope that we make collective decision making better on behalf of our communities. So please don't say that we're just trying to play politics with this. We have tried to engage. The first meeting of this local plan group, members were denied access to the room. And at the last meeting, you said that everybody who attended, your microphones will be muted and locked. So that's caused some consternation for everybody, where we feel we'd like to contribute. We feel that we have some positive ideas that we'd like to make to that. And we feel so far you haven't given us the ability to have our voice heard on those issues. Thank you.
Well, as I said in my preamble, Councillor Attwell, it's very much the same back in 1999. Everybody wanted to be helpful, wanted to be supportive. From what I hear, then you talk down Breckland, and you always are having a good go at the ruling party. Now, what nobody seems to like here is that the local plan working group is an informal meeting, and I'll just read you. It's not a formal committee or a subcommittee with decision-making powers, and as such is not subject to rules on public access, publication of agendas, minutes, or political proportionality. So the whole stream of questions that you've been putting and the whole idea of where you're coming from, it just is political. And you've targeted me as a Conservative today. Thank you very much.
No.
And you've targeted the ruling party. And it is absolutely like it was in 1999, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is. And going forward, the ruling party will be taking the decisions going forward.
Chairman, nobody's disputing that.
Excuse me.
He's responded. I need the ability to respond to that outburst, frankly. I think that is appropriate for me to respond.
Councillor Attwell, I'm not allowing that. The rules of the standing order allow for one supplementary question. I suggest you have a debate in another forum with Councillor Clausen and the appropriate people. We've got a long agenda and I want to crack on through it. Thank you very much. I'm moving on to question 9, which is from Councillor Harry Clark to the Executive Member for Planning, Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chair.
Julie, thank you.
The Capita contract is due to finish partway through the process of undertaking a full review of the local plan. Could the Cabinet Member for Planning confirm that contingencies will be put in place to ensure continuity of service should Council resolve to change course with regard to the provision of planning services?
Thank you. Councillor Clausen.
Oh yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Clark. Yes, the Capita contract is due to expire in June 24. As part of the contract, the Council has the option to provide 12 months notice to Capita to extend the contract for one additional period of 5 years, after which the contract would automatically terminate. The Council has several options. It could extend the contract, it could take the service back in-house, it could find another supplier. Any of these scenarios, the officers within the existing service will be protected under employment and contract law and will continue to provide planning services and ensure continuity of those services.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, do you wish to come back?
Thank you very much for your reply, Councillor Clausen. I wasn't at school in 1999 or in Breckland, so I plead not guilty on that.
Councillor Clark, please could you confine your question to a question?
Thank you, Councillor
Otherwise we'll be here all day.
In terms of contingencies, you've outlined the legal position. I would be grateful when you do write to me, and also we can also look at another forum about other models of planning provision, which might include in-house provision, notwithstanding the legal position of the contract, what other models you might be looking at going forward. Also, we're going to have the white paper coming in, which may affect the planning service. So I would hope that in part of the contingencies, this is also looked at in terms of the risks to the authority as a whole in delivering the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. We're now moving on to a different topic. We're moving on to housing now. So question 10 is from Councillor Susan Dowling to the Executive Member for Housing, Councillor Webb. Julie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could the Cabinet Member for Housing confirm how many new dwellings have been completed in Breckland for each of the last 10 years, given the local plan target is for 612 per year?
Thank you, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Councillor Dowling, for your question. Okay, the totals for the year 2011 to 2019 is 4,226 new dwellings against a target of 4,896. This is for 2011 to 2019. 2019 to 2020, obviously the monitoring is delayed due to COVID-19. Tables for both the questions, this question and also the next question, question 11, which is also mine, will be sent via email to all members immediately after this meeting and also included in the minutes for our public to see. So that will give you the more detail of every year which you've asked for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So, Councillor Dowling, the information will be winging its way to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Webb.
Question 11 from Councillor David Wickerson to the Executive Member for Housing, Councillor Webb. Julie, please.
Thank you, Chair. In view of the current crisis with the lack of affordable housing and the continuing pressure being applied by developers to reduce the required percentile of same in housing developments, can the Cabinet Member for Housing please advise the number of affordable homes that have been completed for the last 10 years and what that number represents as a percentage of the total number of homes completed? This could form part of an affordable housing review, including the question of whether Breckland District Council should consider the option of building council-owned properties.
Thank you, Julie. Over to you, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Councillor Wickerson, for your question. Okay, there will be a table with all the answers which you have required year by year sent to you and sent out to the public after this meeting. The Council is very keen on delivering affordable housing for our residents. The table will show housing completion per annum, which includes within it the number of affordable housing completions as well. The percentage of affordable homes against this total has been presented, as well as the total number of housing completions against the objectively assessed annualised target of 612 per annum. The figures for the years 2018 to 2020 are estimates at this stage. The number of affordable homes completed includes the delivery of shared ownership and shared equity homes. Over the past 10 years, the average yearly percentage of affordable home completions is 20%, and affordable home completions have been considerably below the average in the past 4 years. The Council reduced the percentage requirement of affordable homes on sites of 10 or more homes, or 0.5 of a hectare or more, from 40% to 25% in March 2019. Which was seen as beneficial to enable more affordable homes completions as developers could make this viable in their schemes. Registered providers and developers have confirmed that schemes on site from March have been delayed by 3 months, again because of COVID-19. However, the Council wants to ensure that sufficient number of new affordable home completions are delivered each year for the needs of our residents, and look for creative and new opportunities for delivery by working with registered providers, parish councils, developments, community groups, private landlords and landowners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Are you happy with that, Councillor Wickerson, as the information will be coming out, including all the figures?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Councillor Webb for a very full and professional response to my question. I really do appreciate that. And I look forward to receiving that information so that perhaps Councillor Webb and I can continue the dialogue moving forward once all that information is to hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, question 12 from Councillor Philip Morton to the Executive Member for Customer Engagement, Councillor Ian Sherwood. Julie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can the Cabinet Member for Customer Engagement confirm how he will ensure that full advantage is taken of the government's retrofitting fund to improve the housing stock in Breckland and mitigate climate change?
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I was ready to go there. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Councillor Morton for the question, and I mean that genuinely, because Councillor Morton always gives me an opportunity to speak on a subject that is vastly important to our community here in Breckland, climate change strategy. So, Councillor Morton, the response to this is, of course, you'll be aware that Breckland Council is not a stockholding authority, and all our housing was transferred to the Peddersway Housing Association, now the flagship group. Breckland has declared a climate emergency and is introducing a number of new measures to address climate change, as highlighted in the standing item, which I give to Cabinet at every meeting when I report on our climate change strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Councillor Morton, do you have one supplemental question?
Yes, please. I appreciate we don't have a housing stock that we can directly impact on, but I suppose I'm asking what measures can we work with Flagship to incentivise them to adopt the government scheme? I'm just conscious of a fund being available that we want to take advantage of.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Morton. You're absolutely right. And I'm sure the local residents of Flagship will be keen to see this happen, and any organisations such as the Flagship Housing Group will want to take full advantage of this. So obviously we have dialogue with Flagship, and we'll be speaking with them to make sure that they're aware of this, and I'm sure that they will want to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank everybody for their patience through those questions. I'm sure we all found the questions and the answers really useful. So we're now moving on to item 10, which is questions without notice under standing order number 7. There is a 30-minute time limit on this item, and if any member wishes to ask a question, I'm asking them to direct them all through the leader, who will either answer directly or delegate to the appropriate person. So clearly put your hands up, and please, to quote one of my quotes out of my book, a sentence is one sentence with a full stop at the end. So please keep your questions succinct. Thank you. I think I saw Councillor Jermy's hand go up first.
Thank you, Chairman, and mine is fortunately a question to the leader. Sam, last year, Breckland Council submitted 2 funding applications to the government's Towns Fund to provide much needed support for both Thetford and Dereham town centres. Sadly, both these applications were unsuccessful. Just yesterday, the National Audit Office published a report into the government's decision-making process, criticising how bids were selected. The report revealed the scores for all of the bids that were submitted. The Thetford application scored more highly than both Norwich and Ipswich, who were awarded funding, and the Dereham bid scored more highly than Norwich, but neither Thetford or Dereham were successful. It has been noted that 2/3 of the successful applications were in Tory marginal parliamentary seats ahead of last year's general election, but I best be careful because that may be political. Will the leader commit to writing to the Secretary of State to ask why our Breckland towns were overlooked for this funding, despite their high scores in this assessment process?
Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Jeremy. I have got the audit report in my workflow. I just haven't yet read the document. So thank you for the précis of what's contained within. I'm more than happy to study the audit report, Chairman, and if it's appropriate for me to do so, I will write to the Secretary of State confirming my disappointment and frustration with the system if what Councillor Jeremy said is to be accurate.
Thank you very much. At the moment, the other speakers I have are Councillor Wickerson, Councillor Clark, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Atterwill. If there's anybody else who wishes to speak, will you please indicate so we get your names down? So I'm now moving to Councillor Wickerson.
Thank you, Chair. This question is also for the leader. Sam, following the agenda item at last week's Overview and Scrutiny Commission regarding the current situation in Attleborough and the Chair's response to my questioning the validity of this item and the involvement of Breckland councillors, could all members be circulated with advice and guidance from our legal team to the extent that Breckland councillors can become directly involved in the internal affairs of town councils? Thank you.
Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond as leader of the council. I note that the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission is at our meeting today, and Chairman, you may wish to indulge a response from him as to why he allowed the item to be forthcoming for a councillor call-in. But in direct question to Councillor Wilkinson's question to me as leader, our role is not to intervene and get involved with the governance of statutory bodies such as councils, whether it be town or parish councils. I think the role of the district council is to work in partnership with many different bodies, and including parish and town councils. However, where that relationship is perceived by residents and elected members to be failing their duty, whatever that may be, then there is the opportunity through the commission to call that item in, to raise awareness and to see if the district council can facilitate and support an opportunity for change, not necessarily directly with that body, whether it be the CCG or the CQC or Anglian Water or a town or parish council, but an opportunity to seek change through government. And I think that the commission, from what I understand, is receiving that item again, particularly back again in September. And the commission may be minded to write to the Secretary of State, the Prime Minister or others in relation to how policy could change in relation to governance to parish and town councils. But just to reaffirm, it is not the responsibility of Breckland to intervene directly in the day-to-day management of any other body except Breckland District Council.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Clark. Succinct question, please, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Question to the leader. Does the leader agree that the use of video recordings and live streaming during this period, which we started before the full council cabinet scrutiny planning, has been useful and helpful to residents and communities, both in seeing their elected representative in actions and the challenging opportunities we face? And will he give a commitment that this will continue after the post-COVID-19 period is over, and also consider, where appropriate, for example, contentious large-scale planning applications, that we might use this facility in the evening occasionally where it warranted, because this would not have the same implications for cost, travel and so forth as hitherto mentioned by me. Thank you, Leader.
Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will be aware, the Act only allows us to operate in this type of environment till May 2021. However, as members will be aware, under the Worksmart 2020 programme, the committee suite is undergoing the refurbishment to ensure, Councillor Clark, that the technology is in place so that meetings can be streamed live and recorded live for residents to watch at their leisure, either live or at another time as appropriate to do so. In relation to when meetings are called, that is a discretion for the chairman of those committees, from my opinion, to decide as and when they meet, whether it's during the working day or during the evening or at weekends, to facilitate the best engagement of members of this council. Just to reaffirm that all of our meetings are meetings in public. From a constitutional perspective, they are not public meetings. That is our role as elected representatives, to represent the voice and concerns of residents in that function.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Question to the Leader. Thetford Coach Services have sadly stopped some of their bus services on the Barnum Cross estate, which for decades has taken people into Thetford Town Centre, a service relied on heavily by older residents and less mobile people. The company understandably blames COVID-19, but also difficulties with parked cars in the area. Will the Leader agree to write to Coach Services, inviting them to discuss their issues with the council and look at possible solutions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Leader.
I'm afraid that Councillor Jeremy's already pipped you to the post. The letter went off to Thetford Coach Services last week, and I cited the size of our waste collection vehicles, which have successfully managed to negotiate many parked cars throughout the whole of the pandemic, as an example. And I've cited the requirement of that being such a vital service within our biggest market town within Thetford. So I hope that I will get a response from Thetford Coach Service over the coming days and weeks. And as soon as I do, Councillor Harvey, I will share it with all Thetford members.
Thank you, Leader. And finally, I have Councillor Atterall.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is to the Deputy Leader and Chairman of the Local Plan Working Group.
I did ask all questions go through the Leader in the first place.
Okay, well, I'll ask the Leader then, and perhaps he can answer for me. I understand that the Local Plan Working Group Leader has some terms of reference, which I have been passed a copy of, and in there it says that meetings will not be public because you want frank and candid discussion and debate. But also worryingly, it says materials will be circulated to all members of the council on a confidential basis. All materials, including agendas, minutes and presentations, are to be treated confidentially by members unless otherwise stated. Can you tell me when these terms of reference, or who's actually agreed these terms of reference? Because I've trawled through the cabinet minutes, the full council minutes, going back to the time when the local plan was adopted in November last year. I can't find any reference to the terms of reference being brought to this full council or cabinet to be agreed. And I think, to be honest, all members, if we're being told that we're effectively being muzzled, I think we should at least have the opportunity to make a contribution at a meeting to discuss these terms of reference for that group. So I just wonder if you could confirm who's agreed these, what body took that decision, and why can't I find that on a public forum? Thank you.
Thank you. Leader.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm afraid I haven't got the terms of reference to hand, so can't reference in relation to Councillor Atterwell's question. I'm more than happy to follow up with a full written response in relation to that, but I don't know if the Chairman of the Local Plan Working Group wishes to interject just to give some greater clarity on this day, but if he's not, I'm more than happy to follow up with a full written statement.
Thank you. Councillor Clausen, do you wish to
No, Leader, I
add to that?
haven't got them to hand either, but I think it's trying to confuse, like I said earlier, of the difference between what this local plan working group is. It is an informal meeting, and I think really people need to understand what this working group is. Last time it was a committee of cabinet. The time before it was a general purposes committee. Each was a committee. This is not a committee, and as such, I'm sorry, but I don't have the terms of reference to hand. Indeed, they were drawn up before I became the executive member for planning. But
Thank you, Councillor Clausen. So, Councillor Atterwell, that information will be sent to you. Okay. Do you have another quick question?
Yes, I do appreciate if somebody could send me the written response. And I completely understand the relevance and the difference between a informal working group and a committee. But my concern is that the way these terms of reference are written, it's referencing all members and the actions of what members can and cannot do. So on that basis, I think all members should have had the opportunity to review these terms of reference, and that should have been brought to cabinet or full council. And quite honestly, the ruling group have got a vast majority and you would have won that vote. But I think that, again, it should have been aired in public. That's all I'm making that point. I think we need to try and make this transparent. Thank you.
I get your point, absolutely. The information will come to you and then there can be a further discussion if appropriate. Okay, we're moving on to item 11, which is the annual appointment of committees, chairman and vice chairman for 20 to 21. And the monitoring officer, Maxine O'Mahony, will present that.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to present a report for the annual appointment of committees, chairman and vice chairman for 2020-2021. In accordance with our constitution, the council is required to make appointments to the main committees of the council. The appointments need to be politically balanced in accordance with the political groups where relevant. Not all of the committees meet that criteria. The attached appendix outlines all of the committees and the appointments, and council today need to agree that they are happy with these appointments to take that forward. I understand we may have some proposals for some changes, so happy to take those or any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If you have a question for our monitoring officer, would you clearly raise your hand so that we can see? Julie, can you?
Councillor Clausen.
Oh, right. Over to you, Councillor Clausen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have emailed this to Teresa, but just very, very briefly, Norfolk Plainfields Association, Mark Robinson will be replacing Sarah Suggett. I will become a substitute on the Water Resources East. On the Youth Advisory Board, Ian Sherwood will be replacing Mark Robinson.
Thank you. That actually comes under item 12. So we'll just...
I'm ahead of myself, beg your pardon.
That's fine. So we'll go back to item 11. There are two recommendations which I intend to take en bloc, and this will be a roll call vote. Councillor Jeremy wishes to speak.
I believe Councillor Attawell was before me, Chair.
Sorry, I'm not getting the names through. Right. Okay, Councillor Attawell.
Thank you, Chairman. I have notified Maxine of this previously. I would like to propose an amendment to the schedule in regard to the local plan working group, please. I'd like to propose that the local plan working group is increased from membership of 5 to 7. And I'd like to propose Councillor Harry Clark and Councillor David Wickerson are members of that group. I can't emphasise enough, we all want this to succeed. We all want to work together in a spirit of cooperation. And I think it would be very good and show willingness on behalf of the leadership if they were willing to consider that recommendation. The ruling group would still have an overwhelming majority on that, but I think with their experience of planning and neighbourhood planning, I think those two gentlemen would be excellent additions to that group. And I would like to put forward that.
Thank you. So Councillor Attawell has made a proposition. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Jeremy, I see his hand got. Yep. So we need, if there are no more further questions, because I need to take a vote on the amendment before the original recommendation. Julie, how are we going to do that?
Sorry, Chair, there's no further questions. We'll have to have a roll call.
I think so.
Yes. Over to Mark.
Please.
Oh, Councillor Burt.
Could I request that this is a recorded vote? If there isn't sufficient to pass it as a recorded vote, could my vote be recorded?
Me too, please, Chair.
Me too, please, Chair.
Add me, thank you.
That's fine. We can do that.
Chairman, this is a straightforward amendment. You're quite right. We take the amendment first. So if Julie can do the usual roll call approach, although of course we will then record the outcome in the minutes as per a recorded vote. Once you've dealt with the amendment, we'll then go on to the substantive motion, which is the en bloc provisions in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that advice. Right, over to Julie, who will now do a roll call vote.
Mr. Askew,
Councillor Askew, are you there? Move on, Julie.
Mr. Attewell,
For.
Mr. Bambridge,
Against the amendment.
Mr. Burt,
For.
Mr. Borrett,
I think he left early. He went to Norfolk County Council meeting.
thank you. Councillor Bowes,
Against the amendment.
Mr. Brame,
Against.
Is
Mr. Brindle,
For the amendment.
Miss Bushell,
Against the amendment.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen,
Against.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen,
Against.
Mr. Clark,
For the amendment.
Mr. Clausen,
Against.
Mr. Coleman,
Against.
County.
Mr. Cowan,
Against, Chairman.
Mrs. Crane,
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Dale,
Against.
Mrs. Dowling,
For.
Mr. Duffield, should I move on?
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
For, and can you record my vote, please?
Against, Julie.
oh,
Sorry.
thank you, Councillor Duffield. Mrs. Gray,
Against.
Mr. Harvey,
For.
Mr. Hewitt,
Against.
Mrs. James,
Against the amendment.
Mr. Jeremy,
For.
Councillor Cadell,
Against the amendment.
Mr. Kittle Morris,
Against.
Mr. Kybird,
Against.
Mr. Ian Martin,
Against.
Mr. Keith Martin,
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Monument,
Against the amendment.
Mr. Morton,
For.
Mr. Nairn,
Against.
Mr. Nunn, should I move on?
Yeah, move on, Julie.
Mr. Oliver,
Against.
Mr. Robinson,
Against.
Mr. Sherwood,
Councillor Sherwood, are you there?
Yes, but having a great difficulty with unmuting. Apologies for that. Against the amendment.
Mrs. Suggett,
Against.
Miss Taylor,
Against.
Mr. Terry,
For.
Mrs. Turner,
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Webb,
Against.
Mr. Wickerson,
For with a recorded vote, please. Thank you.
Mr. Wilkin,
Against.
and Mr. Wilkinson.
Against.
Thank you.
Madam
Julie,
Chairman, point of order, please.
I can't see who that's coming from. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kittle-Morris. Yes.
Madam Chairman, did we count the number of people? I understand that each individual member can ask to have their vote recorded in the minutes of how they voted. But to have a general recorded vote, I believe in Standing Order 16.3, we are allowed, you need 12 people to declare for a full recorded vote of the full council.
You are correct, but I understood from the information given to me by Mark Stinson, unless I got it wrong, that because we're recording every vote at the moment anyway on a rolling call vote, so those members that have indicated for an RV, it'll be marked down there anyway.
Chairman, can I assist?
Yes, please.
We're in a very strange position because we've got an item later on in the agenda which changes standing orders around this area. So what I would suggest, Chairman, is that if after the meeting, when I've had a chance to look at it, if it is in order to set out a full recorded vote, I will do so. If it isn't in order, I'll make sure that those members that indicated have their individual votes recorded.
Thank you very much. I like all these useful people. Councillor Jeremy?
If that's the case, Chairman, I think it would be helpful for you to have a show of hands for what members wish to have their vote recorded. Just some said it verbally, some raised their hands. So I think you might want to have a show of hands on that one.
I'm quite happy to do that. So if you wish your vote on the amendment we've just discussed to be recorded, please raise your hand. Julia, let me know when she's got everybody.
The other page, sorry.
That's all right.
So according to who I've seen on the screen raise their hands for a recorded vote is Councillor Attewell, Councillor Brindle, Councillor Dowling, Councillor Gilbert, Councillor Jeremy, Councillor Morton, Councillor Terry and Councillor Wickerson. Is that correct? Oh, and Councillor Clark, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I had my hand up as well, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. It is difficult because we're having to whiz across at least 3 screens at the moment, so we're doing our best. Are you happy with that, Councillor Jeremy?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's great.
Right. So,
sorry, could I just check with Councillor Burt? Did he have his hand up for a recorded vote? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Chairman.
Right. So, by my reckoning, the amendment is lost. Is that right, Mark Stinson, please?
Yes, Chairman. So now you move on to the substantive item.
Right. So we're going back to the 2 recommendations on page 20 of your agenda. And again, there will be a roll call vote as to whether you are for, against or abstaining. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Askew? Should I move on?
Yeah, yes, if they don't answer within a few seconds, move on.
Thank you. Councillor Attewell?
Against, and can my vote be recorded, please?
Thank you. Mr. Bambridge?
For.
Mr. Burt?
Against, and record my vote, please.
Thank you. Mr. Borrett? Councillor Bowes? Mr. Brain?
For.
Mr. Brindle?
Sorry, didn't unmute. Against with a recorded vote, please.
Thank you. Miss Bushell?
For.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen?
For.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen?
For.
Mr. Clark?
Against, recorded vote, please. Thank you.
Mr. Clausen?
For.
Mr. Coleman?
For.
Mr. Cowan?
For.
Mrs. Crane?
For.
Mrs. Dale?
For.
Mrs. Dowling?
Against, and could I be recorded, please?
Thank you. Mr. Duffield?
For.
Mr. Gilbert?
Against, can you record my vote, please?
Thank you. Mrs. Gray?
For.
Mr. Harvey?
Against, could I record your vote, please?
Thank you. Mr. Hewitt?
4.
Mrs. James?
For.
Mr. Jeremy?
Against, and if you could record my vote, please.
Thank you. Councillor Cadell?
For.
Councillor Kittle-Morris? Okay. Mr. Kybird?
For.
Mr. Martin? Ian Martin?
4.
Mr. Keith Martin?
4.
Mrs. Monument?
For.
Mr. Morton?
Against, and please record it.
Thank you. Mr. Nairn?
4.
Mr. Nunn? Mr. Oliver?
4.
Mr. Robinson?
4.
Mr. Sherwood?
4.
Mrs. Suggett?
For.
Miss Taylor?
For.
Mr. Terry?
Against and record it, please.
Thank you. Mrs. Turner?
For.
Mrs. Webb?
For.
Mr. Wickerson?
Against with a recorded vote, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilkin?
For.
And Mr. Wilkinson?
4.
So by
Madam
my
Chairman, I'm not sure my vote was recorded.
No, it wasn't. Councillor Kittle-Morris, could I have your vote, please?
It's 4. I'm sorry, I had trouble with my unmuting.
Thank you.
So by my reckoning, though, the two recommendations are carried. Now we move on to item 12. Now it's your turn, Councillor Clausen. So this is the appointment of councillors to outside bodies for 2020 to 2021. And there is one recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, it's exactly as I said before, and I have circulated the list to Julie and Teresa.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, may I come in, please? Peter Wilkinson.
You may.
Yes, I've been admitted from the Youth Advisory Board with no consultation. I just wondered if anybody had any answers, and the representative for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is not a board of governors, and the management board is not recorded on the list.
Okay, I think we can deal with that outside of this meeting. Is that all right, Councillor Clausen?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no hands. So there is one recommendation. Again, we need to do a roll call vote on whether you are for, against, or abstaining. Keep going, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Askew? Mr. Atterwill?
For.
Mr. Bambridge?
For.
Mr. Burt?
Abstain.
Mr. Borrett? Councillor Bowes?
For.
Mr. Brame?
For.
Mr. Brindle?
For.
Miss Bushell?
For.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen?
For.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen?
For.
Mr. Clark?
For.
Mr. Clausen?
For.
Mr. Coleman?
For.
Mr. Cowan?
For.
Mrs. Crane?
For.
Mrs. Dale?
For.
Mrs. Dowling?
For.
Mr. Duffield?
For.
Mr. Gilbert?
For.
Mrs. Gray?
For.
Mr. Harvey?
For.
Mr. Hewitt?
For.
Mrs. James?
For.
Mr. Jeremy?
For.
Councillor Cadell?
For.
Mr. Kittle-Morris?
For.
Mr. Kybird?
For.
Mr. Ian Martin?
For.
Mr. Keith Martin?
For.
Mrs. Monument,
For.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Nairn,
For.
Mr. Nunn, Mr. Oliver,
For.
Mr. Robinson,
For.
Mr. Sherwood,
For.
Mrs. Suggett,
For.
Miss Taylor,
For.
Mr. Terry,
For.
Mrs. Turner,
For.
Mrs. Webb,
For.
Mr. Wickerson,
For.
Mr. Wilkin, and Mr. Wilkinson.
For Julie, with obviously the conversation afterwards, which might result in amendments.
Thank you. By my reckoning, that recommendation is carried. Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask my tech team, Julie and Teresa. I think we need a 5-minute comfort break. Technologically, can we do that?
Yes, by all means, Madam Chairman, we can do that. But please could members be reminded that we are still recording live. So I suggest, what time would you like to come back, Linda?
12:10. That gives 7 minutes. Okay, so if everyone could return ready for 12:10, refreshed. Thank you very much.
Still going. You
I guess we have to wait for the screen to clear. Do we to be reconnected, Teresa?
No, Chairman, I'm ready to start the meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. I think we were all grateful to stretch our legs for 5 minutes. We're now moving on to item 13, the full year financial performance. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Philip Cowan.
Thank you, Chairman. Huge advantage of having virtual meetings that we don't clog up the facilities. And we can all get back in a few minutes. Perfect. Now, with apologies to many colleagues who have already heard this presentation at Cabinet, which was very well attended. For those who were not there, good luck in what I'm going to say. But also, I would like to reiterate what I did say at Cabinet, which is an echo in many ways of the leader's comments about our staff during this COVID crisis. Our financial team have really pulled all the stops out to produce this particular paper with all its detail, which I'm able to present to you, against the background of having to do much more than their normal day job over the last few months, particularly with all of the grants that they've been able to manage and dispense to the businesses in Breckland. So thank you to them. So here we have before us a paper which identifies the final full year performance for 2019-20. And in it, on the first page, you will see that there are a number of recommendations. And I would suggest at this stage that when we get there, we take these en bloc. However, if I can just draw your attention to a number of factors in this paper, really just to highlight where we've been, where we're going, hopefully in the future. So we will see in paragraph 1.2 that our revenue spend is in excess of what we anticipated by 224,000, despite the fact we've been able to mitigate overspends through judicious use of funds that we have managed to retain throughout the years. There are reasons why this is, and one of the key ones is our housing benefit subsidy costs are just under £200,000 more than were anticipated, and our levy payments on the non-domestic rates are 167,000. Add to that our below budgeted income for our planning service of 160,000 and various other smaller amounts, including EHC of 30,000, gives us this position in which we find ourselves. And I have to say, it's not a position with which I feel incredibly comfortable, but I am delighted that it's as low an overspend as we have due to, as I've said earlier, judicious husbandry of our finances over the last few years. Moving on, if we start looking at some of the detail in paragraph 1.4, for instance, Norfolk non-domestic rate pilot of £559,000 and the general fund of split between them, but we need to bring this particular item to full council because the value is higher than would normally be expected. We have £2.5 million in the general fund, paragraph 1.5, but I would not expect us to be using this general fund going forward other than for the use for which it is intended. We cannot drop below that sum. If we look on paragraph 1.5, our capital outturn spend is actually 71% of what we anticipated. And there are reasons and rationale why we haven't made the 100%, and they'll be seen in the subsequent tables. So if we scroll through, you will see on page 37, which is the actual revenue outturn chart, that the net effect of moving resources, financial resources from various budgets and reserves means that we are, as I said earlier, £224,000 or so adrift. Turning on to the next page, Table 2 shows the significant variances as to why we are showing this position. So you can see, I mentioned 190,000, that's a rounding up, it's 189,504, but housing benefit is by far the largest amount, closely followed by the one-offs on the retained business rates. But you will see also the development control, community safety, and so on. Legal services are showing that we have to draw funds from our reserves in order to manage that £224,000 figure that we've mentioned at the start. On the collection funds, the retained business rates, there it gives a residual deficit of 208,000 for Breckland and going forward 183,000. In our capital on page 41, you will see that some of our capital projects have carried over and hence we're not spending 100% of what we anticipated in the current year. So for instance, Snetterton Power, there's a reprofile of that project. It is grant funded. It's not our money as such, but that's actually been reprofiled because we've been spending time working with the electricity supply company and landowners to determine the most beneficial location for a substation to effectively deliver the power to that. So that's drifted out. The Shipdham land, at, again, a grant fund, whilst we, working with our partner Breckland Bridge, have secured planning permission for the site and have also secured funding from central government for that particular project in part. Unfortunately, we are linked in to another planning application on the opposite side of the road, which means we cannot get going on that project. So we're having to reprofile that project spend. And down the bottom, we've got a large figure against the Thetford HIF. That work, as you will have heard at our recent meetings, that work is well progressing with, again, UK Power Networks and our partners in order to deliver the power to Thetford to a location now which has been agreed to, a substation up the A11, the old Norwich Road A11, just short of the junction with the A11 dual carriageway. Again, that work has been reprofiled and hence our spend has been pushed forward. None of those, we believe, are going to be problematic in terms of securing and drawing down any grant funding going forward. And finally, to reassure members, whilst if you look on page 42, you'll see the pie chart identifies that we have some funds in non-UK banks. None of those are Icelandic banks, and the Icelandic bank position has been regularized, and indeed we are still drawing down some interest from those. So if we go looking forward, you'll see more detail on Appendix B on figures. But if I'd like to take us back, please, to the opening page of the report, which is the recommendation page on page 33. Cabinet have pushed this forward to Council for full approval. So the recommendations are that we note the report and appendix at Cabinet, which we've done, and we have recommended to this Council that we accept items 2, 3, 4 and 5, which addresses the overspend for the previous year. So, Chairman, I would like to move that, recommendation, unless there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan. Please raise your hands if you have any questions.
Councillor Attawell. and Councillor Burt.
Right, okay. Councillor Attwell first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Phil, for that comprehensive report. Could I just ask the question regarding the overspend for temporary accommodation, basically because we've got a lack of affordable housing? It seems somewhat bizarre to me that I sit on the planning committee. Case in point was the recent committee where the cabinet member for housing came along, gave a very eloquent speech about why we need the affordable housing desperately because we don't have enough of it. And we seem to be bound down to developers giving, basically letting them get an application approved, then coming back and reducing the number of affordable homes. And we seem to be, frankly, rolling over and having our tummies tickled. So my question is, what are we going to do as a council to square that circle so that we don't have to keep spending this money in revenue on overspend for housing, temporary accommodation, to ensure that we actually do have the housing stock available to house these people properly without having to spend money on pubs and hotels, etc., to provide temporary accommodation? I think that's something that really, as a council, we need a little bit more joined up thinking. I'm sure everybody's passionate about it and we all want to improve it, but I'd like to hear how we're going to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cowan.
I can answer that in part, but not in detail, for obvious reasons, I suppose. The temporary accommodation and affordable housing are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Temporary accommodation covers a range of topics apart from affordable housing. Affordable housing is not our responsibility. We are entirely in the hands of the builders essentially. Whilst we might set targets, they come back with an open book approach, and our planning department and the district valuer and members will review those and identify whether a scheme is viable or not. And we will take advice from others, i.e. the district valuer probably, as to whether or not the figures that the developer is proposing are acceptable or not. Beyond that, I know as a cabinet member that we are looking at providing our own accommodation. As you mentioned, Elm Road is one of them. We are always looking for alternatives. But I would defer to my colleague responsible for housing, and I don't know if Alison is here. I can't see her on my screen. She must be somewhere.
Yep, she's here.
She's here. She's not on the screen I'm looking at. This is one of our problems. To give you a little bit more information if she's able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Webb, would you like to add on to Councillor Cowan?
Yeah. Of course I would. Yeah, exactly. Councillor Attwell, you're totally right. We are working very hard to provide more accommodation. The team, I can reassure you, is working all the time to try to find different ways of accommodating people. It has been caused, and I'm going to be honest here, last year there was a change in the rules that said that we needed to provide accommodation for single people, which before we didn't have to do. So obviously the numbers have fluctuated and gone up. And also we had the government ruling about rough sleepers, which we've provided accommodation for. I would like to say that the team are not basically looking at putting the rough sleepers back on the streets again. I want to reassure you that we're working with them in the accommodation we've provided to them to actually find proper accommodation for them, working with them to find proper jobs. I think this is totally the right thing to do, and we as a council should be looking at every opportunity to support our residents, whether they are rough sleepers or not. So yes, there is a problem. Yes, we are working hard to address it. I would be more than happy to send you an email with some of the points which we're looking at and discuss it in the future if it helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. A quick response, Councillor Attwell.
Yeah, can I thank Councillor Cowan and Councillor Webb for that comprehensive answer? And yes, Alison, I would very much look forward to seeing that data. One just very quick point, Phil. if accommodation, a suitable premises came available for temporary accommodation, say in the north of the district, I know we're looking at the Elm Road development in Thetford. If something came up in the north of the district, do we have adequate, capital reserves to put money into that and actually spend that on something like that? If it came forward, we found the premises, bearing in mind the finances don't look as good as we'd hoped, will we have the money to actually do something to improve the situation in the north of the district? Is that something you would proactively look at? Thank you.
Well, let me just answer that and also add to what Councillor Webb said. In terms of temporary accommodation, the other, she mentioned that we were very keen to do whatever we can to support rough sleepers and temporary accommodation requirements. And we are working with our registered social landlords, looking at their voids that they have in their system, and we are actually trying to match the voids with the need that is there in the community. So that's another strand that we're actually developing. But beyond that, we're at the process where we're about to start putting our budgets together for the coming year. And part of that budget process will look at just what you're talking about. It will look at what funds and capital and reserves we have available, what grants are available from outside bodies, including central government, and working with our providers as well, who are also responsible for our housing need. We will be looking wherever we can and undertaking, I am sure, with my colleague responsible for assets, looking at what we may be able to do with other property elsewhere in the district. But it all has to be driven by need in the first place. So the location might be suitable or it might not. And that's something which I can't comment on at this present time, but rest assured, dealing with our homeless and temporary accommodation and our housing requirements is really front and foremost in our cabinet agendas at the moment going forward. But as you rightly say, we are in a position where finances are somewhat constrained through circumstances completely outside of our control, but we will be looking very, let me put it imaginatively, constructively at how we might deal with these problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan and the finance team for the report. It's very useful. I will vote for the proposals, but I do wish to express my my significant concern.
Councillor Burt, sorry, can I interrupt? We can't hear you very well. Can you up your volume a little?
Bear with. It appears still to be on maximum.
Okay.
We go again?
Yeah, off you go.
Okay, well, yes, so thank you, Councillor Cowan and the finance team for the report. I'm going to vote for the proposals because we have to move forward, but I want to express some significant concern that these figures were before COVID, they were pre-COVID, and being unable to make those capital investments in normal times is going to have a knock-on effect and possibly going to reduce our ongoing revenue and maybe even those fulfillments. If we're not being able to put in electricity supplies, maybe we might not even be able to meet our 5-year land supply because we won't be delivering houses quickly. So I am concerned that we need to get a check on this and actually get these investments made so that we can fulfill our obligations and receive income.
Thank you, Councillor Burt. There is no doubt that we are progressing our requirements for electricity both in Snetterton, which will assist with our employment aspirations, and also in Thetford, which will help to deliver the necessary power for the housing growth and also our employment requirements in Snetterton, in Thetford, I beg your pardon. These are not long-term blips at all, far from it. The work is progressing at pace as quickly as we can possibly make it. You will appreciate that sometimes UK power networks are not necessarily working at the same pace as we are, but we are keeping the pressure on, and we have teams in place who are doing all that they can to ensure that we meet our commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen any other hands up. Have you, Julie?
No, Chairman.
Okay, so I intend to take the recommendations all four en bloc. And we will do the roll call vote. again. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Askew? Mr. Attewell?
4.
Mr. Bambridge?
4.
Mr. Burt?
4.
Councillor Bowes?
4.
Mr. Brain?
4.
Mr. Brindle?
4.
Miss Bushell?
4.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen?
4.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen?
4.
Mr. Clark?
4.
Mr. Clausen?
4.
Mr. Coleman?
4.
Mr. Cowan?
4.
Mrs. Crane? Mrs. Dale?
4.
Mrs. Dowling?
4.
Mr. Duffield?
4.
Mr. Gilbert?
4.
Mrs. Gray? Mr. Harvey?
4.
Mr. Hewitt?
4.
Mrs. James?
4.
Mr. Jermy?
4.
Councillor Kiddell?
4.
Mr. Kiddle-Morris?
4.
Mr. Kybird?
4.
Mr. Ian Martin?
4.
Mr. Keith Martin?
4.
Mrs. Monument?
4.
Mr. Morton?
4.
Mr. Nairn?
4.
Mr. Oliver? Mr. Robinson?
4.
Mr. Sherwood?
4.
Mrs. Suggett?
4.
Miss Taylor?
4.
Mr. Terry?
4.
Mrs. Turner?
4.
Mrs. Webb?
4.
Mr. Wickerson?
4.
Mr. Wilkin? And Mr. Wilkinson?
4.
Carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, we're getting there, folks. Item 14, Innovative Projects Fund, acceptance and spend of a grant and associated funding. Again, over to Councillor Cowan, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, apologies for those who've already heard this at Cabinet. This is a grant of nearly £181,000, which has been made effectively to the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor in order to do exactly what it says on the tin, and that's drive innovation forward in various ways. The fund is coming to us for approval because we are the delegated body that's legally constituted that looks after the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor. So we have to accept the money on behalf of it or not, as the case may be. I suspect we would really want this money. It's very useful, as you will see going forward. And it affects not just Breckland, but other businesses along the tech corridor. And the objective is to really drive an alternative way of working for some of the technology businesses that we have and want to attract into our district. It's a vital plank of trying to rebuild and build back stronger, not just Breckland, but also Norfolk and particular industries along the A11, which then spins out to other market towns, both in the district and elsewhere in the county. So you will see in this paragraph 1.7, it gives some key outputs from the project. And then in paragraphs 1.8 and 1.9, we have medium and longer term objectives. It is one of the key activities within the restart phase, and indeed forms part of an integral component within the rebuild phase over the next 3 years of the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor delivery plan. It is pretty vital. So you'll see that we have two options to say yes or no, but I would hope that having read the expected benefits in paragraph 4, which is on page 47, you will see that the the idea of taking this money and delivering the outcomes is absolutely essential to the well-being of the district, of the county of Norfolk, and of businesses that wish to come into our district and into the tech corridor and beyond. So I would urge you to support the recommendations on page 45. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan. Are there any questions for Councillor Cowan on that?
Yes, Councillor Burt.
Yep, sorry, it's on my other screen. Yes, Councillor Burt.
Thank you. In a previous role, I've attended or had some contact with NAME, the New Anglia Advanced Manufacturing and Engineering, which is mentioned in the report. And I'd like to impart some information really in that there are some extremely capable and innovative companies involved with NAME, but also an element of caution here, please, in that some of the companies can be a little over-enthusiastic, overconfident. So we need to make sure that any investment is carefully monitored. Now, as an example of that, you might actually have a look at the NAME website and you'll find that even their own website has an invalid internet security certificate. So I'm just saying, yes, make the investment, but let's keep track on it.
Thank you very much.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Burt.
Okay. Anybody else with a question? No, can't see anybody. Okay, there are
recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. There are 2 recommendations on page 45 of your pack. I intend to take those on block, and once again we have to do a roll call vote. Thank you, Julie.
Mr. Askew. Mr. Attewell.
4.
Mr. Bambridge.
4.
Mr. Burt.
4.
Councillor Bowes.
4.
Mr. Brame.
4.
Mr. Brindle.
4.
Miss Bushell.
4.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
4.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen.
4.
Mr. Clark.
4.
Mr. Clausen.
4.
Mr. Coleman.
4.
Mr. Cowan.
4.
Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Dale.
4.
Mrs. Dowling.
4.
Mr. Duffield.
4.
Mr. Gilbert.
4.
Mrs. Gray. Mr. Harvey.
4.
Mr. Hewitt.
4.
Mrs. James.
4.
Mr. Jeremy.
4.
Councillor Kiddell.
4.
Mr. Kiddle Morris.
4.
Mr. Kybird.
4.
Mr. Ian Martin.
4.
Mr. Keith Martin.
4.
Mrs. Monument.
4.
Mr. Morton.
4.
Mr. Nairn.
4.
Mr. Oliver.
4.
Mr. Robinson.
4.
Mr. Sherwood.
4.
Mrs. Suggett.
4.
Miss Taylor.
4.
Mr. Terry.
4.
Mrs. Turner.
4.
Mrs. Webb.
4.
Mr. Wickerson.
4.
Mr. Wilkin. And Mr. Wilkinson.
4.
Carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Julie. Item 15, which I think will be our last roll call vote, so that'd be a good thing. So this is about coronavirus, the emergency governance measures. Over to Mark Stinson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, before I speak to the report, we've already agreed that you're happy for me to mention one other matter for information, which is linked to the Constitution. So if members are happy, I will just deal with that very quickly. The Overview and Scrutiny Commission, the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, is able to give authority to decisions that need to be taken urgently to take place without there being a need for call-in. In addition to the chairman of ONS giving permission, the decision notice itself must state the reasons why a decision is not subject to call-in, and also it needs to be reported to council after the fact, again with the reasons for urgency. They're very rare, Chairman, but there have been two which have been directly as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where two of our tenants have fallen into company voluntary arrangements. And in both cases, a proxy vote on that matter needed to be taken very quickly. It was obviously done in consultation with relevant members, but the reason for urgency was that we wouldn't have been able to respond in the timeline allowed had the chairman not excluded scrutiny. So just to close that circle, Chairman, just reporting to council the fact that there have been two such decisions, and the reasons for urgency are as I've just set out.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. So on to the report, Chairman. The coronavirus emergency has obviously changed the way that we all live and work, and local government is no exception. So social distancing requirements at the moment prevent our normal committee processes for decision making. Indeed, government guidance on safe use of council buildings was updated only last week, and it continues to provide that the government recommends that where meetings can take place digitally without the need for face-to-face contact, they should do so. The regulations, as the leader mentioned earlier, are in place until May of next year. There are a number of, a significant number of our usual rules which are set out in the standing orders and elsewhere in the Constitution that really need to be amended, deleted or supplemented in order to accommodate this new way of working. So an example would be how votes are conducted. So the roll call vote is an obvious mechanism we need to use so that our decision making is open and transparent. But at the moment, of course, there's no provision for that in the Constitution. So these changes will be temporary, and the proposals in the report are set to expire at whatever point the regulations that permit virtual meetings expire. In addition, Chairman, the crisis has tested some of our constitutional provisions. One such provision relates to the Chief Executive's emergency powers, and we've therefore identified some proposed changes. Those changes are only to ensure that the power can be used in the absence of the Chief Executive, so that would default to one of the directors in the Chief Executive's absence. But also to make it clear that the use of that delegation is almost certainly going to be at a time when an immediate decision is needed. It's fairly obvious that you can't apply call-in to such a decision, but we just want to make sure that that is captured in the Constitution. So some proposed changes to that delegation are set out in Recommendation 2 and also in Appendix B. Finally, Chairman, Recommendation 3, that's all about the fact that it's important to be mindful that the usual requirements for members to attend meetings at least once in a 6-month period continue to apply. Unless the council pre-approves an absence exceeding 6 months, the law declares that a seat of a member will become vacant. As members will be aware, a lot of scheduled meetings were cancelled for a significant period of time until the virtual meetings regs were available. And even where virtual meetings are convened, there are fewer meetings now available for members to attend. And at the same time, some members may have potential difficulties which affect their availability. So caring responsibility, possible IT difficulties, potential illness. So Recommendation 3 just seeks the council's approval for any absence for any member where that absence exceeds 6 months, and that protection is proposed to remain in place until the annual meeting in May 2021. Other than that, Chairman, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mark?
Councillor Burt.
Yep. Off you go, Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Mark. I noticed just before the meeting, actually, on page 60, Appendix A, there might be a small typo in there, in that Standing Order 41.3 refers to itself twice rather than referring to 41.2. But certainly with that correction, I'm happy to. I'm content to see Appendix A go through and see how these new measures operate. On page 20, on 63 though, Appendix B, I am less happy. In fact, I'm unhappy on 2 counts. In section 60, the 3rd bullet point, I see no reason to add the where practical when that bullet point already says as quickly as possible. And on the last bullet point, the 4th bullet point there, that seems to have been removed entirely. But that to me looks like that's removing democracy. It says in there as far as practical, so it's not a measure which is being forced upon everybody. If it's not practical to do it, then we don't have to do it. But I think the measure should still stay there. It should still stay as a bullet point. So I'm somewhat less convinced about Appendix B.
Thank you, Chairman. Dealing with the first point, thank you for that, Councillor Burt. I will look at that later. We have got a provision in the Constitution that says that where there are minor numbering errors, we can correct those without bringing it back to Council. So I will look at that, and we'll make sure that those numbering, cross-referencing in the numbering is correct. So far as the removal of the 4th bullet point is concerned, I just refer back to the point that I made in my presentation, which is that very often the emergency power is being used at very, very short notice. So we try to tidy that up slightly, because the 4th bullet point says, so far as practicable thereafter, acting in consultation with the Cabinet. It will very often not be practicable to call a meeting of the Cabinet. So we were simply trying to tidy the wording up to make it clear.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Burt, can I just check back with you? Are you asking for an amendment to that? Part of the recommendation? No, right.
Yes, please. I would like to reinstate the 4th bullet point and remove the where practical.
Okay.
From the 3rd bullet point.
As an amendment to item 3. So you have proposed that. Just before we do that, have we got any more questions?
Councillor Jeremy.
Yeah. Off you go, Terry.
Thank you. I've got 3 points for Mr. Stinson, if I can. The first point I'm sure some might see is rather irrelevant, but I do want to raise it for consistency purposes. I'm really disappointed to note gender-specific references in the document. In numerous cases, it refers to he and him, so that it's not gender neutral. For example, in section 14.1, if a member of the public interrupts the proceedings at any meeting, the chairman shall warn him. Well, I hope we don't have any female members of the public interrupting the meeting, because we don't have provision for it. But I wanted to make that point because it's a bugbear of mine. The second is around attendances, because, and I wonder if Mr. Stinson could comment on this. We need to set an attendance for a meeting to ensure there's a quorum. And if today's meeting is a fine example, numerous members are here at the start of the meeting and not here at the end. They're not required to announce that they are leaving, it would seem. If you're in a physical council chamber, you have to get up and walk out, and it's jolly obvious that you're leaving. Not so with a virtual meeting. So is there any provision within the changes being provided today to note when people are leaving? And I think it's important that from an accountability and scrutiny point of view, that people are noted as being left. I mean, some people left remarkably soon after the start of the meeting, and I think it's a matter of public record that that should be recorded. And the third point is about this 6 months attendance criteria changing for a longer period of time. Virtual meetings make it far easier for people to participate in virtual meetings. There was a member of Norfolk County Council that dialed in from France, I believe, on Monday for full council. And I have no idea the whereabouts of Breckland members today, but we're all here. You can dial in from anywhere. You can dial in from your workplace if that's convenient. It's easier now for people to participate than it was before because we don't have a geographical issue. I wasn't clear, Mark, if the changes are being proposed are Breckland specific, as in we're making it easier for people to have long periods of time not attending any meetings, or if this was a national suggestion and is being adopted all over the place, or is this just Breckland that's easing the restriction for councillors to attend? Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. On the first point, the gender-specific references, apologies that I haven't picked those up. What we did, because the councils up and down the country are adopting very similar changes to their constitutions, the Association of Democratic Services Officers and Lawyers in Local Government produced a model. So we've used their model and tweaked it to fit with our constitution. So it's fair to say that obviously going through that, I may not have picked up on some of the gender specific references. It wasn't put in by me or my team, but equally we didn't notice and pick them up. Attendances for quorum and other purposes and leaving meetings early. No, there aren't any provisions in there to note those, but of course there are no provisions in the existing constitution. I completely take the point that Councillor Jeremy makes, that it's obvious and clear, although I do believe that the bell rings as people join or leave the Zoom system. So I think there is a form of alert, but no, we haven't added anything into the constitution on that point, and it doesn't exist in the current constitution. And then finally, on the point about the 6-month rule, whilst it's not a national provision, it is something that I have spoken to colleagues about in both Lincolnshire, fellow monitoring officers and deputy monitoring officers in both Lincolnshire and Norfolk, and a good number are adopting the same approach. One of the reasons, of course, is that whilst things are working well at the moment, we don't know, for example, whether there may be a second wave, and if so, whether there will be a council meeting that's timed sufficiently to protect somebody who is simply unable to make it to a meeting through illness, or protecting somebody else who's affected by coronavirus. I completely take the point again that for some members, for many members, it's actually easier to attend, but we are planning for a discrete period up until May 2021 for perhaps things that we haven't got on the horizon yet that may well arise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Before I come back to Councillor Burt and his amendment, I just wanted to add something about item 3, and I'm not suggesting an amendment, but I would expect any member, out of courtesy, to let Democratic Services and myself know if they cannot attend a meeting. And we know sometimes they absolutely can't. And I say I have the power, I have the discretion to accept an absence in dire emergency. It might be a family emergency that actually nobody else needs to know about, but please, out of courtesy, let us know, because then we all have an understanding. Thank you. So we need to take a vote on Councillor Burt's, oh, sorry, I need a seconder for Councillor Burt's proposal for that amendment, please. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Monument, are you seconding?
No, I'd just like it clarified. I've got the wording in front of me, but I'm not quite sure whether Councillor Burt wanted all the words that have been deleted to be reinstated. He said something about practicable, going in or staying out. And I'd like that clarified before we vote. He may be right, but I don't know which bit.
So on page 63, it's number 6. The third bullet point has an additional element at the end where it says "where practical," and I am proposing that that is removed as being unnecessary. And the fourth bullet point has been deleted entirely, and I am proposing that that be reinstated.
Right, do we have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Morton has seconded it. So we need to vote on that amendment, please.
Chairman, I wasn't allowed to speak. I had my hand up.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. Do speak.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Can I just ask Mark? I've got no problem with recommendation 1 and 2, but I have grave concerns about recommendation 3. If a councillor at the moment cannot attend a meeting for a period of 6 months because they are ill, you know, that's a very reasonable excuse. They're ill and they can't make the meeting. What is the procedure at the moment? Because my understanding is that if they give a reasonable excuse and the council accepts that the 6-month rule can be extended. I'm just a bit concerned at the moment that the way this is written, some councillors might be minded to not bother between now and May. I'm not saying that there's many who are like that. Most councillors are very dedicated, but you know, this opens up a Pandora's box where people don't need to give any excuses. They can not bother to attend until May. And I'm just wondering why we put that in there if there's provision in the rules anyway, where at the discretion of the council, we can give that permission. I'm uneasy with giving this provision here at the moment. I'm not sure if we've had any councillors recently who've sort of almost breached the 6-month rule, and you know, hence why we're having a council meeting on Wednesday and not Thursday as normal. But I'd just like some clarification on the existing provision, please. Thank you.
Mark, before you come in, if I can give Councillor Attawell an example. So a member of this council was fortunate enough to be offered a new job. And originally, when they had their interview, they said they needed tomorrow off because it was a council meeting. Then we changed the council meeting and it meant that they couldn't attend, and I gave my okay, because why wouldn't I? You're not going to make somebody miss a day of a new job. So, you know, there are circumstances, and whether it's technically constitutionally legal, I think it is. But in all these things, a chairman, the same as the chairman of a committee, must have that discretion. If someone's got a long-term illness, the last thing you're going to do is put stress on them by saying, sorry, you've just lost your seat. But that's why I made the point. I expect the common courtesy of people to let us know. Hope that's all right, Mark. I hope I haven't rewritten the Constitution.
No, Chairman, thank you. So the answer is yes, we have a process in place. We monitor members' attendance, and were a member to be approaching the 6-month absence criteria, we would, where appropriate, of course, bring a report to council for council to determine whether or not the member's absence is reasonable in all the circumstances. The difficulty that we've got now, I wrote this 2 or 3 months ago in anticipation that we were going to need it. The issue we've got at the moment is that there are far fewer meetings, including far fewer council meetings. So we may only have 1 or 2 opportunities. And of course, if somebody's at, say, the 4-month point, where they have had perhaps technical difficulties with remote meetings, added on to a period of time where we weren't holding meetings, and then there were, for example, a second wave of coronavirus, we may not be able to convene a meeting. We may not have a meeting scheduled that we could get that authority from. So this was, appreciate it's unusual, but we are not on our own. Lots of other authorities are doing the same thing. In fact, a number of authorities have done it in a different way. They've had a chief officer, usually the chief executive, use their emergency power to authorise. But the reason that I've advocated against that approach is because there's no case law, and my reading of the Act is that it's only the full council that can give the authority to extend the 6-month period. So this is really all about the fact that it's difficult to predict quite what the world's going to look like next week, never mind 3, 4, 5 weeks, 2 months, 3 months down the line. But I would just repeat, this is a temporary measure. It will come to an end in May next year.
Thank you, Mark. So we need to take a vote on Councillor Burt's amendment to the 3rd recommendation. We'll have to do it by roll call vote again, won't we, Julie? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Attewell.
For.
Mr. Bambridge.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Burt.
For.
Councillor Bowes.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Brame.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Brindle.
For the amendment.
Miss Bushell.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
Against.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen.
Against.
Mr. Clark.
For the amendment.
Mr. Clouston.
Against.
Mr. Coleman. Mr. Cowan.
Against.
Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Dale.
Against.
Mrs. Dowling.
For.
Mr. Duffield.
Against.
Mr. Gilbert.
For.
Gray. Mr. Harvey.
For.
Mr. Hewitt.
Against.
Mrs. James.
Against.
Mr. Jermy.
For.
Councillor Cadell.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Kiddle Morris.
Against.
Mr. Kybird.
Against.
Mr. Ian Martin.
Against.
Mr. Keith Martin.
Against.
Mrs. Monument.
Against.
Mr. Morton.
For.
Mr. Nairn. Mr. Nunn. Mr. Oliver.
Against.
Mr. Robinson.
Against.
Mr. Sherwood.
Against.
Mrs. Suggett.
Against.
Miss Taylor.
Against.
Mr. Terry.
Against.
Mrs. Turner.
Against.
Mrs. Webb.
Against.
Mr. Wickerson.
For.
Mr. Wilkin. Mr. Wilkinson.
Against.
Thank you. So that amendment has failed. So we will now go back to the original script with the 3 recommendations as seen before you, and we will now do a roll call vote on those.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry. Yep.
Could I request that we don't take this en bloc, because I would like to vote differently for individual parts of the recommendation.
Fine.
Is it possible that we could do this so that you give 3 answers, so that we just go through the roll call once?
Are you happy with that, Julie?
Yes.
You sure?
Bravely said.
Chairman, can I just, we need to be certain, are you confident, Julie, that you can capture that adequately? It may be better to do them individually.
I would actually prefer to do them individually, but obviously it's gonna take longer.
No, for clarity and everything, we'll do it individually. It'll just take a little bit longer. So we are now voting on recommendation 1 about the virtual meetings. So for, against or abstain. Julie, thank you.
Mr. Askew. Mr. Attewell.
For.
Mr. Bambridge.
For.
Mr. Burt.
For.
sorry.
Couldn't hear you.
For the virtual meetings.
Councillor Bowes.
For.
Mr. Brame.
For.
Mr. Brindle. Miss Bushell.
For.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
For.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen.
For.
Mr. Clark.
For.
Mr. Clausen.
For.
Mr. Coleman. Mr. Cowan.
For.
Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Dale.
For.
Mrs. Dowling.
For.
Mr. Duffield.
For.
Mr. Gilbert.
For.
Mrs. Gray. Mr. Harvey.
For.
Mr. Hewitt.
For.
Mrs. James.
For.
Mr. Jermy.
For.
Mr. Councillor Kiddell.
For.
Mr. Kiddle Morris.
For.
Mr. Kybird.
For.
Mr. Ian Martin.
For.
Mr. Keith Martin.
For.
Mrs. Monument.
For.
Mr. Morton.
For.
Mr. Nairn. Mr. Nunn. Mr. Oliver.
For.
Mr. Robinson.
For.
Mr. Sherwood.
For.
Mrs. Suggett.
For.
Mrs. Taylor.
For.
Mr. Terry.
For.
Mrs. Turner.
For.
Mrs. Webb.
For.
Mr. Wickerson.
For.
Mr. Wilkin. And Mr. Wilkinson.
For.
Thank you. So that one's carried. We now go on to the second one with the emergency delegation to the Chief Executive. Off you go, Julie.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Askew. Mr. Attewell.
For.
Mr. Bambridge.
For.
Mr. Burt.
Against.
Mr. Borrett. Councillor Bowes.
For.
Mr. Brame.
For.
Mr. Brindle.
Against.
Miss Bushell.
For.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
For.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen.
For.
Mr. Clark. Mr. Clausen.
For.
Mr. Coleman. Mr. Cowan.
For.
Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Dale.
For.
Mrs. Dowling.
For.
Mr. Duffield.
For.
Mr. Gilbert.
For.
Mrs. Gray. Mr. Harvey.
For.
Mr. Hewitt.
For.
Mrs. James.
For.
Mr. Jermy.
For.
Mr. Councillor Kiddell.
For.
Mr. Kiddle Morris.
For.
Mr. Kybird.
For.
Mr. Ian Martin.
For.
Mr. Keith Martin.
For.
Mrs. Monument.
For.
Mr. Morton.
Against.
Mr. Nairn. Mr. Nunn. Mr. Oliver.
For.
Mr. Robinson.
For.
Mr. Sherwood.
For.
Mrs. Suggett,
4.
Miss Taylor,
4.
Mr. Terry,
4.
Mrs. Turner,
4.
Mrs. Webb,
4.
Mr. Wickerson,
Against.
against.
Yeah, sorry, against.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Wilkin and Mr. Wilkinson.
4.
Thank you. So the second one is carried. We now move on to the third one, vacation of office due to failure to attend meetings. Julie, for the last time.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Askew. Mr. Attewell.
Against.
Mr. Bambridge.
For.
Mr. Burt.
Against.
Mr. Borrett. Councillor Bowes.
4.
Mr. Brame.
4.
Mr. Brindle.
Against.
Miss Bushell.
4.
Councillor Marion Chapman-Allen.
4.
Mr. Sam Chapman-Allen.
4.
Mr. Clark.
Against.
Mr. Clausen.
4.
Mr. Coleman. Mr. Cowan.
4.
Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Dale.
4.
Mrs. Dowling.
4.
Mr. Duffield.
4.
Mr. Gilbert.
Against.
Mrs. Gray. Mr. Harvey.
Against.
Mr. Hewitt.
4.
Mrs. James.
4.
Mr. Jermy.
Against.
Miss Councillor Kiddell.
4.
Mr. Kiddle Morris.
4.
Mr. Kybird.
4.
Mr. Ian Martin.
4.
Mr. Keith Martin.
4.
Mrs. Monument.
4.
Mr. Morton.
Against.
Mr. Nairn. Mr. Nunn. Mr. Oliver.
4.
Mr. Robinson.
4.
Mr. Sherwood.
4.
Mrs. Suggett.
4.
Miss Taylor.
4.
Mr. Terry.
Against.
Mrs. Turner.
4.
Mrs. Webb.
4.
Mr. Wickerson.
Against.
Mr. Wilkin. And Mr. Wilkinson.
4.
Thank you.
Thank you. That one is carried as well. So all three are carried. Thank you very much. And thank you, Julie. Your writing hand will be running out. Well, we move finally to item 16. There are no items which I have decided are urgent. So on that note, can I thank you all very much for your input, your patience, and for those that have been watching us. I don't know how many participants there were, but I think there were a lot of viewers. And keep well, keep safe, and see you soon. Thank you very much.